honest with you, comrades. Welcome to Socialism Saturday. Socialism Saturday is a weekly gathering on Saturdays at 6 p.m. on YouTube, on Odyssey, on Rockfin, and on Rumble. And speaking of which, I better turn on the stream on Odyssey. Or not Odyssey, Rockfin. There we go. Now we're actually in all the places where we come together and we watch the most dystopian of the dystopian. We watch the farthest left of the far left, and we even play, yes, Leonard, socialism bingo. We will absolutely do that. Yes, I didn't forget about Bitchcraft. I didn't realize it was the second Saturday of the month. I will be talking about that in a second. I owe an apology to my supporter community because usually on the second Saturday of every month, I hold a Bitchcraft call, which to my credit, I didn't actually post about this week because I forgot. But here's the deal. I didn't look at a calendar, and I thought that this weekend was the first Saturday of the month, not the second Saturday of the month, because I didn't look at a calendar. So I do apologize for blowing off Bitchcraft, but it wasn't. I just didn't realize we were in the second week. All right. Everyone calm down. I'll make it up to you somehow. Anyway, guys, for Socialism Saturday, we watch the most dystopian of the dystopian. We watch the farthest left of the far left, and we talk about it. And you guys got to know that I don't always look at calendars, all right? And tonight, we are going to be watching what I think is actually going to be really interesting, if I'm honest. We are going to be watching a presentation called 21st Century Fascism in the United States. And this is from our old friends at Haymarket Books. We love Haymarket Books. They give us so much great content to work with. They are the consummate socialists that we turn to whenever we need the most dystopian of the dystopian. They are the sponsors of the literal conference called Socialism. That's how Socialism Saturday started. And so we are going to be watching a presentation they did 1 year ago. So this was back in 2022, round time April-ish, I'm guessing. This is when Joe Biden is in office. This is a year after January 6th, just to set the framework of the moment of fascism that we might be discussing. And they did this presentation called 21st Century Fascism in the USA. Here's the description. The January insurrection renewed arguments about whether the United States is experiencing a form of insipid fascism, while liberal resistance figures like Timothy Snyder characterized Donald Trump as an authoritarian who was always bound to impose emergency dictatorship. I'm pretty sure Trump didn't actually do that. I could be wrong. What's going on here is we're watching socialism. We don't agree with socialism, but we're watching it anyway. That's what Socialism Saturday is. Let's see. Donald Trump is an authoritarian who's always bound to oppose emergency dictatorship, even though that didn't actually happen. The left's arguments have been more complicated. The conditions for classical fascism, imperialist crisis, class civil war, socialist revolution, anti-colonial struggle, and the emergence of a new nation state fighting for their share of colonial systems and the stresses of capitalist modernization are absent. Rather, today's crisis pertains to long-running problems of accumulation, the breakdown of neoliberalism, globalization, the crisis of political hegemony, and the ecological emergency. That I don't think there's anything that actually means anything in this entire paragraph. In the absence of mass fascist parties, paramilitary organizations, and civic associations, the new far right has congealed largely through social media. From Donald Trump's unique role as a social industry agitator to the upsurge of armed white supremacist militia against the innocent and always peaceful Black Lives Matter, the question is whether the reactionary authoritarian mobs coalescing today, remember this was a year ago, represent an inchoate fascism or the dying convulsions of a declining source of conservatism from whiteness to patriarchy. Building on Richard Seymour's forthcoming article in Salvage 10, Annie and Barnaby. Never trust anyone named Barnaby. Will host a conversation between Richard and Nikhil on how the left should understand today's growing far right. This discussion will be part of the ongoing Salvage Live event series hosted by Haymarket Books. And Nikhil here is a professor of social change and cultural analysis at New York University. I almost went to New York University. Fun fact, I got into NYU back in the day, and I wanted to go to Boston University, which is where I ultimately ended up going, but then my mother didn't file the right financial aid paperwork with Boston University, and they weren't going to give me any scholarship money, and then I was going to go to NYU, and then BU swooped in at the last minute and gave me the scholarship money because my mother filed the right paperwork. So, looks like I dodged a bullet there because Boston University was actually reasonably sane when I was there because it had a conservative leadership. Totally woke now. I would never go to Boston University now. Boston University ain't getting any more of my money, I'll tell you that. But when I was there, it was actually not that bad. And looks like I dodged the NYU bullet. And who wants to live in New York? New York is so dirty and awful. Anyway, Richard Seymour is the founding editor of Salvage. His most recent book is The Twittering Machine. I wonder what that's about. Annie is a writer and podcaster. Okay, that means she doesn't have a job. And Barnaby is writing his PhD at Columbia. I told you not to trust anyone named Barnaby. PhD at Columbia? Columbia's like the most Ivy League, the most woke of all of the Ivy Leagues. Was I ever woke? I don't think so. Listen, I considered myself a liberal. I never quite got over to the farthest of the far left. So I think that I was always reasonably in the middle. So that's what we're watching today for Socialism Saturday, guys. Now, what I want to really pay attention to in this presentation, the reason we watch Socialism Saturday is not only that we're masochistic, not only that, it's a Saturday evening and maybe we all need better lives or something like that. It's not for any of those reasons. It is to understand the perspective of the enemy. That's why we do it. It is to make sure that we are listening to them in their full form, not clips on Twitter, not Tucker Carlson's commentary on them, because these people are always wrong. I firmly believe that people who regularly tune in to both Happy Hour on Friday and Socialism Saturday on Saturday know more about what the woke left is doing than anyone on the planet. I truly believe that. I think we're like 2-3 years ahead of where average people are in terms of understanding what is actually going on. And the reason that is we listen to them. We let them talk. We listen to the boring bits. We listen to the cringy bits. But we know so much more about what's actually going on than even the red pilled or even the people who think that they're red pilled. And I promise you, it is so much worse than people think it is. We are so effed in so many different ways, which we all understand because we listen to these people talk. Now, what I'm going to be listening for in this presentation is I want to hear them define the word fascism. What does fascism actually mean? Why is Donald Trump a fascist? Because as of right now, I mean, you could argue Trump's running for president, but is he really? Trump isn't even really mounting a campaign. Nikki Haley has been running all around the state of New Hampshire. There have been other candidates slowly trickling into New Hampshire. Donald Trump hasn't been to New Hampshire. Like, where the hell is he? Because I live in the belly of the primaries, man. Like, if you are a Republican candidate for president and you are not in New Hampshire, then what the holy hell are you doing? Because they're all starting to run around. They're all doing these events. They're all building their teams in New Hampshire. Donald Trump ain't here. Where the hell is he? So you can argue that he's running for president, but I more so think that he's playing golf. I don't think he really wants to be president. And oh well, yeah, he might, he did have that little court case for the 37 felony counts for a campaign finance violation. Some might call that fascist, wouldn't they? Wouldn't you call 37 felony counts for a campaign finance violation that basically every presidential candidate has had some form of campaign finance violation ever, but Donald Trump is the only one that gets charged with 34 felony counts for paying off a porn star. Some might argue that's a little bit fascist. Maybe that's just me. So, guys, we're going to watch Socialism Saturday tonight, and I want to hear what the definition of the term fascism is, and hopefully we will get some insight into that. Now, if this is your first time at Socialism Saturday, I want to prepare you. These are real socialists. These are not AOC socialists. These are not Bernie Sanders socialists. These are not CNN socialists. Okay, these are the real deal. And so, what you need to know if you've never been to Socialism Saturday before is these people speak a completely different language than you or I. It might sound like they're speaking English. You might recognize all the words, but that doesn't mean you're going to understand what they're saying because they really do. They speak in code. They have different definitions for things. It's going to sound like word salad to you when you first start watching it, but just stick around. I promise you're going to learn it. You have to basically learn it through osmosis. That's the best way. We will try to help decipher. If you have questions, please put them in the chat and we will try to answer them. I will try to provide my own interpretation on what these people are actually saying. And we can go from there. But I want to just manage expectations that if you feel like you don't understand a single thing that's being said, it's not you. It's them. They're crazy. They speak in code. They understand each other, but no one else understands them until you start listening to them for a while. And then guess what? Once you learn their language, it gets even more scary once you learn their language because you're going to start picking out things that like your kid's teacher is saying. And you're going to be like, that's what the socialists said last week on Socialism Saturday. Why are you using the same language as the socialists? And you'll start to see it everywhere. Because once you understand their language, every time it shows up in modern society through like, traditional kind of like normie things that people do, you're going to be like, uh-oh, socialist, Marxist. And you're going to be able to identify these people when no one else can. So that's what we're doing tonight, guys. Please mount that like button for me if you are anticipating enjoying our presentation tonight, or maybe enjoying is not the right word, but you know what I mean. We got a couple things before we get started. Number one, please make sure you are subscribed to my Substack. Now, those of you who follow me know there's been a little kerfuffle with Twitter and Substack this week. I've done a couple articles on it. Elon Musk is apparently really pissed off that Substack has started a Twitter rival. And for about 24 hours, he was disabling every single Substack link on his site and then lied about it and kind of got called out. And so I do actually have good news to report. It looks as though Twitter is now reversing course. Okay. Listen, hang on. Randy, you are allowed, if you are, it seems as though you're a socialist. Okay. You're a socialist. Got it. You are allowed to be in the chat. You are allowed to participate. You are allowed to make your arguments about why you think socialism is better. What you're not allowed to do is insult me and insult other people in the chat. Okay? There are 2 rules in my chat. Number 1, don't be a dick. Number 2, no whining. You seem to be breaking the don't be a dick rule. If you want to hang out and try to convince us all that we are all wrong and that socialism is great, you are more than welcome to do it. But you will not insult me and you will not insult other people in this chat. And if you do it again, I'm just going to block you and you won't get a chance to try to convince us of anything. So I respect diversity of opinion, but we're going to keep this environment nice for everyone, all right, including me and including everyone else here. So it looks as though Elon Musk has reversed course on the the Substack Twitter feud, because as of a couple hours ago, Substack links are working again, and you can tag Substack again without being penalized for it. And so that's really good news. I'm really happy to hear it because Substack is the home base for my content and my work, and I think it's amazing. And please make sure you subscribe to my Substack, Carlin, KARLYN.substack.com. If you want to know what's been going on with the Twitter feud, you can look at this article that I posted yesterday. Twitter disables links to Substack, won't let you share, like, or reply. Of course, this is what's been reversed now. And if you really want to see what has happened in the last 24 hours, check out this one because I documented Elon Musk lying, going after Matt Taibbi, and he actually ended up getting fact checked on Twitter. He got a community note attached to his tweet because the lie was so egregious. So if you want to find out what's been going on with the drama, and I really do hope Elon Musk comes out and says, like, my bad, guys, I screwed up. That was a dumb thing to do. Check out those articles. I also posted this one last night, and this is part of a new series I'm doing on my Substack called the Woke 101 series, which is basically a series of posts. If you're kind of like new to the culture war and you don't understand the language and like it's all really confusing to you, I'm putting together a series to try to really explain what the ever loving F is going on. And the first one that I decided to start with, because I was just inspired to start it last night, I was laying in bed, I wanted to go to sleep, and then I had this idea for this article, and I was like, F, I need to get up and write it. I wrote about whether or not you want to be a social media reply guy when you're fighting back against the woke left. Because there are benefits to doing that. And every once in a while, you can actually, discover real change. But there's also drawbacks that I wanted to talk about. And that's what that article is about. Like, listen, being a social media reply guy is how almost every single person gets their start in fighting back against the woke left. I'm not saying anything bad about it, all right? There are just some things that I've learned in the 3.5 years that I've been in this war every single day that I want to pass on to you so that, you consider that. And so I wrote this article for the Woke 101 series last night, and you can see there is now a Woke 101 series in the Substack that it's going to be its own section, and we're going to be doing a series of articles about that. That was in my actively unwoke roadmap that I wanted to launch for this year, and so I'm beginning to launch it. So that's another thing you're going to find. Now, I also have some other events coming up this week. I have, of course, my birthday is on Wednesday. Yay. And I'm going to be holding, well, a little bit of a subversive webinar if people want to join me. It's going to be called Embrace Your Inner Narcissist because, of course, April is my month of narcissism. And I truly embrace it as the Aries that I am, and I'm hosting a webinar on my birthday called Embrace Your Inner Narcissist. It is totally free to join. I'm really just doing it for fun, and it's going to be about the positive traits of narcissism, because people like to talk about the negative traits, and okay, that's valid, but we're not going to do that in this webinar. We are going to talk about the positive traits of narcissism because everyone is a little bit narcissistic. If you weren't narcissistic, you wouldn't take care of yourself. So there's nothing wrong with embracing the positive aspects of it. You can sign up for free on my Substack, artofthetrigger.com. It is on Wednesday at, I believe, 8 p.m. Wednesday at 8 p.m., I think. Wednesday at 8 p.m. That is when we are going to do the Embrace Your Inner Narcissist webinar. And again, you can sign up for free. Now, if you want to make a donation to help support the work I'm doing, you will have the option to do that. Of course, this is my month of narcissism, so I feel a little entitled to you guys paying me money when I teach you stuff, but you don't have to. It's okay. It's okay. We'll keep it between us if we do. But if you want to buy me a little birthday present, that option is available. I am also on Thursday doing another workshop in my Unwoke Your Work series called Love Your Leadership Style. Now, this is a series where I'm taking my corporate training stuff and I'm bringing it online for people who are looking for personal and professional development opportunities that don't have politics in them at all. And this is a great presentation. I really love doing it. It is all about how you can find your inner leadership, your inner leader, and you can use it in so many different circumstances. You can use it at work. You can use it in your community groups. You can use it when you're trying to organize to go to the school board meeting, stuff like that. That is going to be happening on Thursday. There is a price tag attached to it. But if you are a supporter in my locals or my Patreon for $25 a month or more, you will have the option of attending the workshop for free. And then you can purchase the additional disc profile on top of that if you want to. You don't have to, but that option is available. So I will be sending out more information about that this week to everyone who is purchasing or supporting me at $25 a month or more. You're going to be getting an email tomorrow about that. And if you want to join, I would love to have you. But if you're not supporting it $25 a month or more, you either can sign up or you can purchase it at the higher price. Whatever is clever, whatever works for you. Jan says, my Unwoke art shirt I bought should be coming in the mail today. Well, it's funny you mentioned that, Jan, because Unwokeart.com is the home of the Socialism Saturday t-shirt. It's home to lots of other t-shirts as well. But if you want the official Socialism Saturday t-shirt, then you can get it on Unwokeart.com. It comes in black. Of course, it comes in red. It comes in a couple other colors too. And so if you want to pick that up, that's great. I also, speaking of real socialism having never been tried, I also launched a couple new designs this week with our favorite cultural warrior, Mao himself. And I have to tell you, I was playing around with this for a while and I came up with two that I really like, but I'm living for this propaganda poster. I love this propaganda poster. I just think it looks so good and I'm so happy with the way it came out. So that's an option for you. You can also get it on t-shirts and hoodies. And then I've got this nice little portrait of Mao, perhaps a little bit later in life. And the reason that I made this is like I just love the kind of like almost evil look in the eye, and I just thought it was a great result. So both of those are up on unwokeart.com right now, and I do really appreciate it. Now, who's that person that has actively unwoke Substack? That's me. Hi. My Substack, I have like 8,000 Substacks you guys are discovering. So that's on unwokeart.com if you would like to do that. Last announcement before we get started is movie night is tomorrow. Now, because it is Carlin's month of narcissism, there we go. I get to pick out all the movies for movie night this month. Normally, someone else does it. I take back control for the month of April. And tomorrow we are watching a classic, The Legend of Billie Jean. This movie is awesome. It is absolutely a little bit narcissistic. It's all about, fighting back and fair is fair. It has a great soundtrack. It is from the 80s. It is awesome. Like, I'm afraid of the Chinese. Why would I, like, what? Don't ever try to make people afraid of expressing themselves based on a repercussion of a Chinese cancel mob. I don't give two flips how the Chinese feel about the designs that I put in my store. They can fucking manage their own goddamn feelings. Anyway, no, because I'm creating my designs, but I do appreciate it. You should make your own designs though. I think that'd be pretty great. So we're watching The Legend of Billie Jean tomorrow in movie night for the supporter Discord. If you are a member of my Substack, a paying member of my Substack, you will get access. If you're a paying member of my locals, you will get access. If you're a paying member of my Patreon, you will get access. If you are even a member on this here YouTube channel, you will get access to the supporter Discord. You will get a newsletter tomorrow telling you how to get access to it. And then we will gather at 8 p.m. tomorrow night to watch The Legend of Billie Jean. We do trivia, we have discussions. It's going to be awesome. And then you can see the rest of the movie night schedule for this month. And it is really one of my favorite days of the week. It is a great group of people. If you guys are a supporter and you have not yet been to movie night, come to movie night. It will give you a little break, a little bastion of sanity. All right, guys. Now we do play Socialism Bingo. Let me see. How Socialism Bingo works is here's a link for your bingo card. Click generate card. Yes, solidarity might be on there twice as it is there. So that means you just get a free square. I haven't fixed it yet. You get a free square in the middle. Then we're going for lines or we're going for corners. If you get a bingo, shout it out in the chat. You don't win anything, but it passes the time, stuff like that. And so if you want to do that, that is available to you. And let us know if you get a bingo. Hero Blast says, I'm a fetish artist. What does that mean? I ask what that means, Hero Blast. The same kind of cancel mobs that went after Carlin would go after me, just saying. A fetish artist. All right. You do you, Hero Blast. I'm not here to judge. So, guys, with that, let's get into our stream. Oh, wait, I need a beer. My glass is empty. Hang on. If anyone else is drinking something fun, let us know in the chat. I always try to drink a red beer for Socialism Saturday. So we're going with this here Ruby Slippers beer. And this is a raspberry sour ale. And so that should be nice and red. And I think I actually need to fix this stream too so I can actually hear the sound. Hang on. But let's pour this beer first. Let's see. Let's see. No, it's not red. Why isn't it red? It's supposed to be a raspberry sour ale. Oh, well, I'm sure it's still delicious. Must be like a wheat beer or something. Cheers, guys. Happy Socialism Saturday. Let's, oh, bot. By the way, I got the coffee mug in the mail today that I ordered from you, and it looks great. I'm going to show that to you, for on the call on Monday, but I got it today. It looks really good. All right, guys, let's dig in for Socialism Saturday. We are watching 21st century fascism in the United States. Let's get this party started.
Welcome to Salvage Live, where we attempt thoughtful conversations in the project of understanding the world and turning it upside down. I'm your host, Annie Olaloku Tariba. You'll hear in a moment from my co-host, Barnaby Rain. Salvage Live is brought to you by Haymarket Books and Salvage, a journal of revolutionary arts and letters. And Barnaby and I are very excited to join the editorial board of Salvage this month. Salvage 10 is being finalized now, with poetry and art and essays on Palestine and the 5-year retrospective on Brexit, one that forms our launch pad tonight. Tonight we discuss American fascism, with 2 guests from either side of the Atlantic. Richard Seymour is among the finest writers on the British left, not the first, whose essays you can read in Salvage, the London Review of Books, and elsewhere. And his range of books, from the liberal defense of murder to the Twittering machine, names a useful range to understand his latest subject for an essay in the upcoming issue of Salvage on the question of fascism in the United States. Nikhil Pal Singh is a professor at New York University, a brilliant critic of forms of political myopia on both the right and the left, as well as a chronicler of racial reaction and racial radicalism, as in his books Black is a Country and Race and America's Long War. First, some words from us. Over to you, Barnaby.
Which one's... Oh, he looks like a Barnaby, doesn't he? Can't even get his technology working. Socialists suck at technology even worse than I do. I mean, they're live. Can Barnaby hear anything? Is Barnaby with us? What's going on with Barnaby? Annie's just like has no idea what's going on. She has nothing else to say. When is someone going to say something?
What's in a word?
Oh!
Words don't just denote and describe phenomena. Words communicate. Wittgenstein taught us in Austin, an illocutionary force intended by a speaker or a writer. So what's the force intended by calling someone or something fascist? The obvious answers are quite revealing. On a moral arc assumed across the West and even more broadly. Hello, can you hear me now? Hello, everyone. Sorry, I think I was premature there.
No, you aren't premature, bro. No, you were not premature at all. Socialists always suck at technology. Universally. They're really sucking at technology today. This is not their best day. It's the fascists. The fascists have sabotaged them. The fascists have sabotaged Barnaby's internet connection.
He said there's a delay. Maybe if he comes out of it and tries to enter again, what do you think?
Oh, too bad.
Okay.
These are real socialists.
Sorry, guys.
That's okay.
Come on, socialists, get it together. You're live on the internet. Okay, they were not live, but they recorded this live. This is like a little much even for socialists. I'm going to start fast forwarding in a minute. Come on, social. What the hell? Hang on. We're fast forwarding. Okay, Barnaby's about to come back. Hang on. Oh! Here we go.
Hello, everyone.
Hello, Barnaby. Finally.
There seems to have been a technical problem of the kind that defines what we are as a left.
We're watching how communism actually works right now.
So I'm going to start again with our introduction to this event. What's in a word? Words don't just denote and describe phenomena. Words communicate, Wittgenstein taught us in Austin, an illocutionary force intended by a speaker or writer. So what's the force intended by calling someone or something fascist? The obvious answers are quite revealing. On a moral arc assumed across the West and even more broadly, Nazism represents absolute evil, and fascism means Nazism or something approaching it. Hence the constant appeal of fascism as a label to discredit opponents. Right-wingers claim that a stern left represents the new fascism, that the people they invade are Islamo-fascists. And after 1945, left-wingers repeatedly saw echoes of fascism in empire, in the police, in plenty of conservative politicians. Those echoes were often so real as to be tangible, the same henchmen. The irony is that the charge of fascism today represents a claim about a return to an abominable buried chapter, the exceptional 1930s now suddenly flaring up again. But in fact, the diagnosis of fascism's afterlives and mutations has been constant since then. There never was such a rupture, from its endurance in Spain and Portugal and Greece to its shadows in the post-war West German state to its exporting from Europe to South America and Sub-Saharan Africa and Asia. The shot in the charge, he's a fascist, implies a particular view of fascism as a singular black mark before a democratic transformation. But that is a view all four of us today want to challenge. From such stock anti-totalitarians as Timothy Snyder and Anne Applebaum, calling Trumpism fascism meant isolating it, rescuing the image of normal bourgeois democratic politics. CNN talked of concentration camps while Trump was president and immigration detention facilities once Biden took over the cages. The question for our event today, and for a global left facing authoritarian reaction from Brazil to India, is what happens when we stop thinking of fascism as a diagnosis of the exception. Can the word be used differently? Or is it just too connected now to this Eurocentric liberalism of ruptures and coups?
Oh, they're going to try to redefine the term
Similarly,
fascist.
the force involved in calling something fascist is heavily about the kinds of oppositional politics that can then be demanded as appropriately anti-fascist. Popular frontism dies hard. The emergency alarm of fascism is usually a call to assemble as broad a resistance as possible, allying with all and sundry. But a claim about fascism is also the emergency against which Antifa calls for setting aside niceties. Anti-fascism could look like the Comintern's third period, an insistence that only properly transformative socialist politics can meet the threat, and all the moderates are abetting it. That might be a fitting way to speak of the relationship between austerity and arrogance from liberals and...
Come on, Barnaby! The internet was like, not today, Satan. Oh.
Politics looks not forward, but back over its shoulder as it speaks. The work of analyzing our present is sometimes hindered by our fixation with analogies from the past. Even as Stalin consolidated his power, Bolshevik leaders were reading of revolutionary France, anxious that Trotsky would be their Napoleon. So the firmament of 1930s Europe created a distinctive form of right-wing politics. The tenuousness of parliamentary democracy, the terrifying spectre of Bolshevism, the post-1918 violent legacy, the inequalities and the training grounds of colonial power, the romantic nationalism of the Flanders Gap and the long crisis of liberal rationalism after the failure of 1848, the novel rise of the bureaucratic state, These things all made possible an optimistic modernism of centralizing authoritarian imperial power, at once Mussolini's cult of youth and Franco's crusade to defend tradition and the church from a rival socialist modernity. Clearly, our conditions are not identical, though in different parts of the world today, different elements of this old synthesis still live. Our goal tonight is not to pick apart parallels or identify differences, stuck still in that moment as our ground zero. Our goal is to ask what more general patterns of mass and state violence in the defense of social domination were iterated in particular ways by classic fascism. Might we then recover the anti-colonial and the new left bid to give more general, politically powerful content to the charge of fascism by doing precisely the thing that liberal anti-fascists loathe, asking what forms of thought and life made the atrocities of the 1930s and 1940s possible, what parents Hitler had, and then asking what was vanquished in 1945 and what was not, in this planet still saturated with degradation and murder.
Settle your quarrels, come together and understand the reality of our situation. Understand that fascism is already here, that people are already dying who could be saved, that generations more will live poor, butchered half-lives if you fail to act. Do what must be done. Discover your humanity and your love in revolution. Those are the words of George Jackson, a Black revolutionary and political prisoner, whose analysis of a distinctively American fascism, which emerged specifically from the liberal democratic form.
Hang on, Brucey, I'm glad you're here, Brucey, because you're not going to believe this. There was an asshole on Twitter today that was using exactly the same profile as you. And I'm pretty sure it was you on Twitter. I mean, there might be another person using the same profile as you on Twitter. I don't know. But like, I had to block that asshole, and I thought it was you. And I felt really sad. I was like, this guy's always been so nice. He comes to Socialism Saturday. Like, what's going on? Then I saw you on Twitter, say something different. I was like, oh, it's just a different person.
Seems strangely absent in the pages of the New York Review of Books, as a center positions itself as savior. So when do we name the horror? Whisper it all you want, and with all the trepidation befitting of an evil which should have been resigned to museums, but the word is on everyone's lips, and its ghost is in the hold. It is bursting at the seams and gnawing at the empty barricades. For 4 years, Trump walked us through the valley of death, and once again, we're
Trump
told
walked us through the valley of death.
Fascism was already here, and how would it announce its arrival? A speech, a torture, a massacre, a tweet? As continuity underscores the day-to-day slog of neoliberal democracy, we scramble to name new horrors and conjure the ghost of old. Everything is changing, and yet everything is the same. And what of the resistance? We name horrors in order that we prepare ourselves for struggle or a death, to know if it is time or if it is too late. What does it mean that we are still waiting to act, to stop it in its tracks before it overwhelms us? How do we confront the fascism that happened and is happening? We start that project with Richard Seymour's essay in the next issue of Salvage, currently under preparation for subscribers. Tell us about that essay, and in particular, Richard, you write that the best question for our moment is not, is this fascism, but is it fascization, a process? Why the distinction?
That's a good question. First of all, I think it's important to say that the reason why people are talking about fascism is precisely because there is a sense that there's something unique and distinctive about Trump, and not just Trump, obviously Modi, Bolsonaro, etc., and the kinds of politics they represent. In other words, this isn't your grandfather's Republican Party. This isn't the traditional mainstream conservative right, at least as we've known it since the Second World War. That's the idea.
What is the acceptable conservative right? Because I've been watching these people for like 2.5 years now, in one form or another, and I have yet to hear any definition of what an acceptable conservative is. It kind of seems like anyone who is to the right of Mao is deemed to be a militant alt-right fascist in some way. So what is traditional conservatism? It's conservatism that bends the knee to democratic bullshit. I mean, well, congratulations. The Republican Party is doing just great at that. The Republican Party is amazing at bending the knee to the Democrats at every single effing turn. They're like 2 years behind the Democrats. They're going to start supporting critical race theory pretty soon. Some of them already are. But even with those people, these people would not define that as like an acceptable conservative.
Anyway, so we need somehow to relate to that sentiment that there's something different happening here, while at the same time linking this experience back to
you're probably
the
right, Tracy. Liz Cheney, an acceptable
pervasive
conservative.
realities of racial
because she bent the
capitalism
knee to
today.
them.
So what's the essay about? I think, first of all, it is an attempt to engage with the question of whether it's appropriate to speak about fascism in relation to Trump and particularly his grassroots, and Modi and Bolsonaro and say Jobbik in Hungary, whether there's a process going on here that involves fascism.
The Proud Boys are not fascist. The Proud Boys are not always the brightest crayons in the box, but they're not fascist by any means. They don't like the Proud Boys because the Proud Boys like to beat the shit out of Antifa. And therefore, because the Proud Boys like to beat the shit out of Antifa, they're considered to be fascist because Antifa are just peaceful folk that just want to fight fascism. And so because the Proud Boys want to beat the shit out of Antifa, they must be fascists. Okay.
In some way. And I think one of the ways to approach this is to take the approach that Arthur Rosenberg did. And Rosenberg was a dissident Communist Party member in Germany.
Yeah, cowboys are a lot of feds.
He was attempting to analyze how Hitler and the National Socialists had taken power. And in his analysis, he broke with some of the sort of mainstream forms of analysis, specifically the sort of Stalinist line that fascism was the dictatorship of a particular sector of monopoly capital. Obviously, that wasn't sufficient. There was something else going on, something that involved the masses. And so Rosenberg ended up talking about the mass preliminaries, the mass preconditions for fascism. Of course, he spoke about capitalism. He talked about the predicates of Volkish nationalism, but he was particularly interested in how masses of people could be so ready, so available for fascism. And that's the thing that I think we want to take on board for this. It's not just a question of, whether, Timothy Snyder, Anne Altenbaum, and people like that were speaking as if Trump was going to take office and from there take power.
Trump
in other words, he was
did
going
take
to colonize the state with his allies. He was going to declare a state of emergency. He was going to shut down the institutions of deliberative or representative democracy, shut down civil society, etc., etc. Well, one of the things we know about Trump is that he didn't do very much at all policy-wise. I mean, he did a few things that were very, very harmful, but nothing like what even his limited agenda suggested he would get up to. That he was a rather indolent president, that insofar as his agenda was carried out, it was the parts of the agenda that were perfectly commensurate with the Republican Party's establishment and its mainstream. So obviously, we're not going to get very far talking about fascism in that connection.
Oh,
nonetheless,
wait. Did he just admit that Trump's not a fascist? Did I hear that right? Did we have a moment of sanity in the mind of a socialist?
Would be worth asking, for example, given that Trump was encircled within the state, given that he had the opposition of the CIA,
it's going to come back around
the opposition of MSNBC and CNN, given that the Senate and Congress were against him, at least as far as his white nationalist agenda went, and given that there were people leaking against him from day one, and that he faced an FBI investigation and attempts to impeach him, 2 attempts, it seems unlikely that he would be able, even if he wished to implement
the
kind of matured fascist agenda, even if he had that at his disposal. So it would be far more...
Donald Trump and the Republican Party controlled every branch of government for the first 2 years of his presidency. Can we have a reality check that if they wanted to implement a fascist agenda, they damn well could have done it? But they didn't, not because they couldn't. That's not why. They didn't because they're not actual fascists. Deluded and feckless, yes. Useless, yes. But not actual fascists. Oh, shit. My bad.
Appropriate to speak about the forms, if we're going to talk about fascism in this connection, the forms of, let us say, inchoate or incipient fascism that exist within US society and which allowed Trump to take power by, if you like, appealing to those forms of incipient fascism that are already there. So, for example, the obvious white nationalist messaging, the appeals to America first, the coddling of neo-Nazis, the sort of embrace of Blue Lives Matter, particularly violent racist current within policing, within the sort of repressive state apparatuses, his barely concealed anti-Semitic messaging. All of these sorts of tendencies
grandchildren are
were suggestive
Jewish.
of somebody who was leveraging a latent fascism.
That's why.
And trying to mobilize public opinion along a sort of friend.
Trump didn't implement any policies. That's true. But do you know why he didn't implement any fascist policies? Because he's a latent fascist. That's the only reason. He's latent. It's like a secret plan that only Trump knows and didn't implement when he was president because he's a latent fascist. Okay, sure.
And enemy distinction, wherein, of course, the enemy was suitably nebulous and hydra-headed. It could be Muslims, it could be Mexicans, whom he said were rapists and murderers. It could be, later on, it turned out that it was he was promoting the QAnon conspiracy theory that there were Satan-worshipping communist child molesters and child sex traffickers working in Hollywood and in centers of American political power. In other words, I think if you were to boil all this down, this conspiratorial and theologically expected worldview.
Yes, Trump is 100% a narcissist.
Really boils down to the idea that there's a satanic antichrist pulling the strings somewhere, and that Donald J. Trump is going to lead the resistance of the virtuous against it. And so it wasn't only resistance intellectuals who were wrapped up in a fantasy of a totalitarian dystopian nightmare about to befall them. This seems to be ubiquitous in American society, this apocalypticism. So I think that if we're talking about fascism, we're talking about something that is much less concentrated, centralized.
London School of Economics is where a lot of this stuff came out of. That's why
we would expect if we were looking at, say, the 1930s, or if we were expecting this to be 1930s cosplay, with paramilitaries and the party state.
Yes. Hang on. Pause. Someone's asking me about giving me money, so I'm going to pause and answer. Yes, the $5 Substack will give you access to the 2 Zoom calls that I do every single week on Mondays and Wednesdays with my supporter community. It will also give you access to the Discord. How that works is I send out a weekly newsletter called the Unwoke Roundup on Sundays. I used to do it on Saturdays. I'm doing it on Sundays now. It just makes more sense. And at the bottom of that newsletter, you are going to get access to your supporter perks for the week. So your Zoom links will be there, access to the supporter Discord, stuff like that. So you can get that benefit on the Substack, on Locals, on Patreon. And I appreciate you asking about it, Sam. And I hope I do see you on a Zoom call. That would be really great.
In the streets.
Yay!
And a difference. Hello everyone. I'm very sorry about my delay that seems to be happening.
Yes, Barnaby, you're ruining everything.
We're having this conversation,
which we knew you would. There he goes again. Barnaby is. I told you never trust someone named Barnaby. How right was I? That take aged well.
I can step in just until. Oh, Barnaby's back.
Hi everyone. I'm really sorry about my connection issues today. I hope can you all hear me on the
Yes, Barnaby.
Yeah.
We're having this conversation after the defeat of Trump electorally, and I wanted to ask Nikhil, who raised in a discussion we had earlier, the strangeness of the conversation moving apparently seamlessly in American politics from fascism to inflation, and that's sort of like a short electoral cycle analysis, our analysis of what are surely longer term trajectories is beholden to the short term immediate vagaries of losing an election in 1 year or losing by a few votes the next year. What's the importance of talking about fascism now?
I profoundly disagree with you on every single level.
Thank you.
Profoundly disagree with you.
Well, it's a perplexing issue, and I think the way you've set it up, and by framing the fact that we have never not been talking about fascism really since World War II. The sort of the defeat of fascism is central to the narrative of liberal institutional politics, both at within the West.
Remember, this is the NYU professor right here, New York University, NYCAL.
The national scale and also at the global scale. So the whole idea of a rules-based international order, the whole idea of a kind of liberal nationalist basis for inclusive citizenship, the idea that the trajectory of American democracy after World War II is toward the kind of overcoming of white supremacy and its kind of bastions, all of these are set in motion by the struggle against fascism during World War II. So it's a very profound and powerful story that is at the heart of kind of American political culture. You could call it an anti-fascist story, not in the sense of kind of leftist anti-fascism, but in the sense of liberal anti-fascism, right? And of course, we know that within that, there were tremendous accommodations of the far right, from fascist client states to right-wing death squads and paramilitaries to the smuggling in of Nazi scientists to the accommodations with Southern white supremacists and far-right elements that were kind of constantly being at least kept within the possibilities of a wider right-wing politics. But that politics is on the defensive in the United States after World War II. And really, it doesn't achieve any kind of breakthrough until Ronald Reagan, right? And you could say that Ronald Reagan, who is now thought of as a kind of saintly conservative centrist, but when he was elected, really was a representative of the far right, of the Goldwater right, of the right that was revanchist in terms of race politics, that was militantly anti-communist. So drawing on the traditions of kind of rollback, the kind of far more militaristic view of kind of how to approach the world order. Now we don't want to get into a long discussion of Reaganism, you know, and what it actually meant and how Reagan actually governed. But Reagan achieved a kind of center-right hegemony in the United States by putting some of those elements into play, but by not actually fulfilling them, not actually delivering on them in some sense, right? So one of the questions I have for Richard really is, you know, when we think about Trump, I mean, Richard said that we're talking about Trump today because there's something unique and distinctive about Trump and about the break that Trump represents. But I've been sort of a little bit more on the kind of continuity side of the argument, which is to say that there's a continuity in the post-war American right. There's a continuity that connects, say, Reaganism and Trumpism. And part of what has changed is the balance of forces and the kind of structural predicates of the kind of governing project in the United States. So what Richard in his essay talks about in terms of a kind of steady hegemonic decomposition.
But I like that his
so the right can't actually organize a project in the United States right now, say in the way in which Ronald Reagan
ain't that
did.
the truth?
Or even,
ain't that the truth? The right can't actually organize a project in the United States right now. Bro, I have to agree. Okay, socialists are right. Broken clock is right twice a day. Socialists get things right every once in a while. Normally, they think they are the most oppressed people in all of society. But every once in a while, they say something that's a dead banger on, which is the right can't organize a project in the United States today. I agree. They are not capable of doing it. I have given up hope on them.
Even in the way in which George W. Bush did. And when you think of the projects that Ronald Reagan and George W. Bush organized, I'll give them two names. Reagan organized mass incarceration within the help of the Democrats.
Hang on.
And George Bush.
Hang on. Jeffrey, we're going to have a conversation right now, and I need you to listen, and I need you to listen good. The left controls every major institution in this country. Do you really think that the left got into a position where it controls every major institution in this country if they don't have jobs and don't have busy lives? This is an excuse. You don't prep and train your kids because your kids turn into leftists as soon as they go to college. So no, you have got to stop lying to yourself. I'm not allowing this bullshit anymore. I have instituted a new policy that, and I'm fucking serious about this. Any conservative who says, we have jobs, that's why we can't do anything, we have jobs, the left doesn't have jobs, we have jobs, I am blocking your asses. And the reason for that is that it is retarded. It is absolutely batshit insane to believe that the reason that the left controls every major institution in this country is because you have jobs and they do not. That is retarded. That has no basis in reality at all, in any way. And conservatives are never going to accomplish anything until you get it through your thick skulls that everyone is fucking busy. Everyone has jobs. Not just you. Everyone has jobs. And guess what? Everyone else makes time to do things that conservatives goddamn refuse to do. So I don't want to hear this excuse anymore. I work 10 to 15 hours a day every day of my life, except for I work a little bit less on Sundays. I work maybe 8 hours a day on Sundays to make up for the fact that conservatives refuse to do shit. Because the excuse that they always use is, we have jobs! While most of the time your jobs are actually less time consuming than my job. So I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear it. Stop making excuses for your own inaction. This is why they are winning and you are losing. Because they don't make excuses. They have jobs too. Every single person in this video has a job. Every single one. You might not like the jobs they have. See, now Jeffrey's going to run away crying. All right, goodbye. You might not like the jobs that they have, but that doesn't mean they don't have jobs. This is like the perfect example. Conservatives would rather whine and complain and make excuses and then run away like the whiny little bitches they are than to face any sort of reality. It is so predictable the way that conservatives react. We have jobs! No one else but us has jobs! We have jobs! Don't you dare tell us that other people have jobs too! We have jobs! Okay, well, this is why you lose, and you wonder why. Let's keep going.
Bush organized the global war on terror. Now, you could say that both of those projects in different ways were failed projects, but in my lifetime, those are the greatest examples of mass state violence that we have experienced inside the United States and in the United States in its relationship to the world. Trump accomplished nothing even remotely close to that, right? So then there's this other odd kind of paradox of thinking of Trump as a kind of acceleration of far-right politics, and yet an acceleration of far-right politics that's actually capable of doing much, much less, right? And so you started your question, Barnaby, with the fact of Trump's electoral defeat and how we've so quickly switched now to a conversation about how the sort of now retrofitted resilient center is going to sort of deliver on something that can keep that specter of the far right at bay. And that can kind of, as Biden said at the G7 or at NATO, I guess it was, bring America back, right? And none of us really believe that America is coming back, because the structural requisites for liberal governance also don't exist anymore. And those structural requisites, from my viewpoint, really involve a kind of promise of growth and mobility, an ability for the governing party to really deliver on some kind of future, right? And it's that sense that the future has been lost, right, that was so central to the emergence of Trump, right? So what does it mean then in this moment to think about fascism when you have less political violence, say, than came before, when you don't really have a mass movement? I'm putting it starkly because I agree with Richard that there's something going on here, that inchoate fascism is a very interesting way to talk about it. But we have less political violence, arguably.
You have less political violence because you idiots aren't rioting anymore.
We do not have a mass movement on the right. We don't have a claim to futurity or utopia coming from the right. And we don't have a revolutionary challenge to the bourgeois order. We have a kind of restoration of a certain kind of bourgeois politics, now more influenced by the left. So
to be really clear, I didn't time him out. I blocked him. I don't want him coming back. I am cultivating a very specific audience on this channel. And the reality is that if I allow people who whine and complain and will only be disruptive into my audience, it will be defeatist to the purposes that I have, which is to actually find people that are willing to learn and listen and to do things in the real world. And if I have like a chat full of people who are making excuses about all the reasons they can't do anything and they don't want to listen to reason and they don't listen to, reality, they are unhinged from that reality completely, there is nothing I can do. Because the voice of one bad apple will counterbalance the efforts of two really highly engaged people. I'm not willing to pay that price. And so I know, I'm explaining to people my philosophy about this. I want people who are interested in doing real things and learning and actually sitting and listening and really picking apart all of this stuff. And I have consistently found that the people who come in and make excuses for why they can't do things, they are only ever going to be disruptive. It might mean I have a smaller audience. I'm completely okay with that.
Conversation has now flipped very quickly in the United States. We're not talking much about fascism. There is a conversation about what the Republican Party is doing and how we should interpret what they're doing, and how we should interpret it in relationship to fascism. But I'm curious how Richard responds to that, because it does seem to me sometimes that it's tough to parse this, right? It's tough to tell what it means to call it inchoate, which is to say, how strong is it? How resilient will that tendency be? And how much should we kind of be concerned about it? So those would be
I'm really glad to hear that, Bonnie. Thank you.
That would be my opening sort of gambit here.
Well, if I can come back on that, because I think those are really, I think that's a really well phrased challenge. And there's a lot of areas that I agree with what Nikhil's just said on. In particular, if you go back to Reagan, It's fascinating because although you're absolutely right, I mean, he's been deified by the reputation makers and turned into a saint of moderation. But if you look at how he campaigned in 1980, it was very much leveraging the themes and political energies of revanchist segregationists, and taking up the agenda of what were called pragmatic segregationists, those who didn't feel that they could get away with de jure segregation any longer, but felt that they could shift the agenda of segregation onto a number of related racially loaded issues like welfare, for example. I mean, you can find that stuff beginning in the South in the 1960s, all that moralized discourse about welfare. And then, of course, the criminal justice agenda, the anti-drugs agenda, all of this sort of stuff. So I think that way of talking about the assimilation of fascistic elements, of, you could even say, inchoate fascisms, into a broader hegemonic strategy, which, you know, obviously it goes to demonstrate, both Reagan and Bush go to demonstrate that it's wrong to think of hegemony as a practice purely in terms of consciousness formation, in terms of securing consensus, because the other side of consensus almost invariably is well-targeted violence against various outgroups and the so-called underclass and so on. So I think that it's correct then to say that what has happened is that the right has been unable to continue its long-standing practice of assimilating in a form of right-wing transformismo those forms of inchoate fascism into a broader center-right project.
Mm-hmm.
I think what I'm interested in with regard to Trump is a number of things. First, I think it is just the case that he crossed a number of lines in ideological terms, and in political terms. Perhaps a part of the establishment's distaste for him is the fact that he didn't come from within, you know, the Republican Party establishment. He funded himself to a large extent. He didn't rely on the corporate funding cartels. He also broke with certain standards of bourgeois civility, which is not a small thing, I think. I think it's relevant here. Just how it's relevant, I'll try to come back to. But I think more important is that he had a relationship to the mobilized base, which is, you know, let's be clear about this, it's not a mass base. It's certainly nowhere near as large as the base for Black Lives Matter in recent years, but it's nor is it an insignificant base in terms of the growth of militias, which, according to some data, has doubled in scale since 2008. So you've got 200 militias. I mean, what this actually means in practice is very hard to say, but we know that when Black Lives Matter was mobilizing on the streets, very much with the support of the Trump administration, militias were on the streets and various sort of disorganized armed vigilantes pointing their guns at Black Lives Matter protesters, killing people in some cases. There was a surge in vehicular assaults. You can then link this back to a series of other trends. And I think, again, these are trends of disintegration of anomie. For example, the rise in lone wolf violence, which has been soaring. I mean, if you look at the S-curve of diffusion, whenever a pattern or a trend is taking off, at this point, you would say that lone wolf violence has been taking off, and it's the beginning of a takeoff period. You would say that a series of other things like mass shootings, which are not directly political, but often overlap with far-right political agendas, resentment of women, resentment of Black people, and so on, that they're taking off at roughly a similar time, even as other forms of criminal violence have been falling up until 2020, actually. You know, falling for a long, long time. Now, this is causally complicated. It's a very difficult area to parse, I admit, because, of course, violent crime is overdetermined in terms of its causes. But just to note that these trends are happening and that they represent an attempt to organize in the absence of organization. So, for example, lone wolf fascism is very much convoked within these antisocial social forums, these troll farms, not troll farms, but gaming forums and the rest of them, where essentially people behave to one another in almost the opposite way that you would expect to behave around people that you were genuinely socializing with. They're consistently cruel and horrible to one another. They are anons, so they don't have identities. But it's in these fora that they're able to forge some kind of fascistic contagion, using the Lone Wolf Manifesto, generally speaking, as the medium for a contagion. So, you know, Breivik's cut and paste manifesto, which...
Hang on, I want to highlight this chat because I really do appreciate it. Christian says, I have turned a couple of young who have removed their woke blinders onto your programs, Carl, and thank you for having the courage to infiltrate and expose some of this poppycock. Poppycock is such a great word. We need to bring that word back. Thank you, Christian. I really do appreciate that, and I'm glad you have found the material helpful. I love that this guy's getting so analytical about QAnon too.
It's largely culled from the works of the English far right, of the US libertarian right, so-called, and so on, the Islamophobia industry, all of that put together.
Libertarians are not all on the right.
A manifesto, and as
like
Breivik
legitimately,
put it,
libertarians are not all on the right.
His massacre was the marketing strategy for the manifesto. This is what he said, so again and again, there's this pattern wherein violence has been used as an attempt to stimulate in part the ideological framework, the ideological radicalization through which some form of fascistic, proto-fascistic organization could begin to take place. And the extraordinary thing about this, I think, is that where you've seen these trends, on the one hand, the growth of militias, the growth of lone wolf fascists, mass murderers of various kinds, and then, of course, the growth of millenarian cults. I mean, QAnon just happens to be the most well-known, and it became very prominent partly because the Trump administration embraced it. When you see what's happening there, for some reason, I think in the past, association with this sort of politics would have been, I certainly think would have been the death knell for any presidential campaign. I think it would have been it would not have led to more political success. Whereas I think what we've seen over the last 4 years, and probably, you know, in a process going on longer than that, is the destigmatization of the far right, of the overt far right, the destigmatization of certain far-right tropes and ideas and thematics.
These guys have no idea what the real alt-right looks like. I promise you. These people have no idea how bad it actually gets. And if you want to know how bad it actually gets, I would encourage you to start an account on Gab. I do have a Gab account. I have used that Gab account on several occasions to instigate the real alt-right. May not have always been the smartest decision I've ever made, but I wanted them to give me information about who they are and what they believe, and that's the way I chose. And if you have questions about what the real alt-right is, go on Gab. If you have questions about what the real alt-right is, go on to Nick Fuentes' Telegram group every once in a while, just to see what they're talking about and to see what they're doing. There are real people that are much more alt-right than these people have any awareness, because what these people are doing is looking at MAGA supporters and Proud Boys. And occasionally you might find an overlap between Proud Boy and someone on the alt-right, but usually not really. Usually they're just like guys that like hanging out and like fighting Antifa and stuff like that. Like, MAGA and the real alt-right are two completely different things. Normal conservatives and the real alt-right are two completely different things. It is really bad on Gab. It is almost unbearable on Gab. I spent, in the month that I was banned on Twitter, I started building up my other platforms. I cannot tell you. I started just provoking the actual white supremacists on Gab because I wanted to be able to block them all to make Gab actually useful for me. I have probably blocked thousands of real alt-right, the farthest, like the most extreme that you can go, the real white supremacists, the real neo-Nazis, the real anti-Semites. These people do exist. The right likes to pretend they don't. They absolutely do exist, and they're all hanging out on Gab and Telegram. So if you want to know what that looks like, go on to those sites, create an anonymous account, do not do it under your real name, and just start looking at what you're seeing. And I promise you, you're going to find so much worse than Charlie Kirk. You're going to find so much worse than Jack Posobiec. You're going to find so much worse than like Mike Cernovich or any of the other more mainstream people that they claim are alt-right. No, 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 no. Those are just conservatives. But the alt-right does exist. It's just that these people have no idea what it looks like.
And the fact that sometimes, or increasingly, these sort of micro-fascisms, if you like, seem to be actually rendering these campaigns more popular. So, for example, who would have thought that Trump, despite losing, would add, after everything that's happened, 10 million votes to his base?
It is that bad.
And these votes being picked up.
It's worse than you think it is.
As is increasingly the the stereotype, or as was the stereotype we were given to expect among older, uneducated, working class white men. I mean, I don't know how good that explanatory framework ever was, but that certainly didn't hold up in 2020. In 2020, although the vote for Trump was disproportionately white, as it always is for the Republicans, it ate into the Latino vote, it ate into the Muslim vote, it increased its share of votes among Black people. Again, a very small minority there, but still increased its share of the vote, suggesting that there's something beyond whiteness, as the sort of mobilizing basis for any kind of incipient or inchoate fascism.
And by the way, when it comes to the real alt-right, and I'm responding to this chat right here, I get so warped from these, I don't know if I'm ready for that, referencing the real alt-right. I hesitate to say this, but I would take these people over the real alt-right. And I'm not joking about that. These people are deranged. They've got stupid ideas. Like, they're wrong on so many levels. But the real alt-right is really dangerous. Really, really, really dangerous. More dangerous than these people. And I do consider these people to be dangerous. I think their ideas are dangerous. I think their ideas would hurt a lot of people. But the real alt-right, these people got nothing on them. That's just my opinion.
Although even that's, of course, complicated because there are various ways in which one can make a bid for whiteness. So I think adding 10 million votes to his total, given everything that's happened, given the failure to deliver on most of his elected promises, but given his success in the culture wars, in using Twitter as his sort of main vector for any kind of unmediated, unabridged sovereignty, using Twitter as the means by which to stimulate.
Hang on. Jason is a conservative, and I know Jason is a conservative because Jason is denying the existence of the real alt-right, because conservatives always like to deny the existence of them. I know I'm interacting with them because I studied them for damn near a fucking year. That's how I know. They are the real alt-right. It's not there are some feds, absolutely, but not all of them. Conservatives universally just want to deny that this stuff is happening on their side. No, no, no. It absolutely happens. And again, if you don't believe me, go on Gab. Yes, I would include Kanye West and Nick Fuentes in the real alt-right. 100%. And listen, guys, if you are unwilling to go on Gab and experience what the real alt-right is, I'm not answering any more questions. Go on Gab. Get an anonymous Gab account. Go on Gab and see for yourself who these people are, what they're talking about, what they're saying, how they speak to people, what their propaganda looks like. They're doing it all public. This is not a secret society. Well, no, they do have some secret groups, and I've been in those secret groups as well. But go on Gab. I will absolutely blame them because they don't listen. They don't listen. I have quite You are so full of shit. Jason, you are full of shit. I'm calling it right now. You are telling me you've never seen the real alt-right on Gab. You are full of shit.
Popular violence, whether it's inciting against Ilhan Omar, accusing her of supporting Al-Qaeda, accusing her of being anti-American, telling her to go back to her own crime-infested country, all that stuff. Whether it's...
The reason that I say Jason is full of shit when he says he's never seen the real alt-right on Gab is because the CEO of Gab promotes them. The CEO of Gab retweets them. And so if you are on Gab and you have used Gab, not just have an account, but you've actually used it, and you are not aware of what the alt-right is, you are either not paying attention or you're lying to yourself. One of those two things. Rhonda says, for a while, I didn't like spending time learning about socialism, and after I watched some of your videos and Socialism Saturdays, I'm finding it so informational. I'm understanding so much more now. I do appreciate that, because that's the purpose of what this is to really learn about them. Then you guys aren't paying attention. I'm sorry. You're either paying attention or you are lying to yourself, or you're a member of the alt-right and you're lying, which they do all the time. I'm not dismissing the fact that both you and Jason, could actually be on the alt-right and sympathize with these assholes and are just lying about it, because people literally do that all the time. I've watched them do it. I've watched them gaslight people. So if you are on Gab and you don't know what the alt-right looks like, you are either sticking your head in the sand, you are lying to yourself, or you're lying to us. One of those things is true. It is so easy to find this content on Gab. It's not even funny, bro. It's not even funny. I have had thousands of these people attack me on Gab. Don't tell me that's not real.
Encouraging militias to turn up arms.
Yes, that is part of it. Absolutely.
Meetings, as part of a general climate in which medical officials and local politicians are getting death threats, credible death threats from people angered about social distancing measures, believing that social distancing is communism, etc.
So Mark is asking a question. Thank you, Mark. I just joined in and here I hear this guy talking about lone wolf fascists. Can you tell me what he means by this? He basically means someone who's like not affiliated with a group performing like an act of violence or something like that against people, like against like Antifa or something like that. So instead of saying like a member of the Proud Boys, they're saying like someone that acts on their own, like I don't know, like a Timothy McVeigh or something like that. Yeah, Cozy. Cozy isn't. Yes, Cozy is. Well, that's the problem then. You haven't been on Gap lately. But Cozy, oh yeah. Oh yeah, 100%. Anyway, let's move on.
Etc. In a context in which there's a broad sense of not just apocalyptic challenge, but increasingly apocalyptic challenge that is defined around the figure of communism, a totally hallucinatory figure, but nonetheless communism manifested in the Biden campaign, manifested in social distancing, manifested in the most milquetoast kind of social justice warrior politics.
It's Nick Fuentes' platform.
Manifested obviously in Jeremy Corbyn, supposedly an Eastern Bloc spy, etc., etc. One could go on, but generally speaking, there's this apocalyptic expectancy which characterizes all of these trends that I'm talking about, and they seem to reach a mini crescendo in 2020 and 2021. Or early 2021, which is suggestive to me of a course of popular radicalization in a dialectic of radicalization with the Trump administration and its political outriders. And that, I think, that describes some of the pattern, some of the trajectory that makes the Trump administration different from others. He didn't exercise real governing power at all. What he did was try to, and often succeed in, stimulating the mainstreaming of far-right themes and ideas among his base, and the uptake of popular violence to intimidate enemies who were understood in paranoid conspiratorial terms as, communists. And the ongoing strategy of culture wars in American politics, the war on critical race theory, in Brazil, the war on so-called gender ideology, wherever you go, you find a version of this sort of culture war politics being played out. And it seems to be invariably linked to forms of, in India, to forms of pogrom, in the US, to more diffuse forms of violence, in Brazil, to a combination of official police violence with forms of paramilitary violence and so on. That's the process that I'm talking about in relation to so-called fascisation. And I think that's probably what's different.
Thanks so much. That's so rich. And it's brought up quite a few questions in my mind. I'll try to kind of limit my questions, but the first was just kind of trying to think through this timeline. And I think what's really interesting also when we think about Trump and fascism is how quickly the kind of possibility that Sanders represented seems to have fallen away. And if we kind of think about that moment in the initial election.
No, there are legitimate racists as well.
In the Clinton election.
Identitarianism.
In which, on
like
both sides
societies.
of the Atlantic, we seem to get the prospect of maybe some kind of resurgence of the social democratic left. And so if we're thinking about fascism as framing itself in resistance to something, a misdiagnosed and deliberately so problem, then potentially maybe our question should be framed around what that resistance should be, right? Because the implication of naming something as fascism is, as we kind of spoke about off the top, when it's bad enough to fight, right? And if liberalism or neoliberalism positions itself as the center ground, which it's not yet bad enough to fight, it's bad, it's intolerable for so many people, it's caused, countless deaths, but it's not just quite as bad as fascism. Maybe some of the framing of our discussion of fascism has to take into account that it is a competition of possibilities, or thinking about what comes next. And I think there was a question in the chat box about Nazism and utopia, and thinking about how it does seem to be the case that in these instances, and this kind of leads me on to the second question, the prospect of the resurgence of social democracy is also the return of politics itself. The form of the culture wars is steeped in the fact that for so long there had been essentially through kind of neoliberal technocracy the pushing out of politics from the kind of social sphere, right? And all of a sudden you get the 2008 crash. It makes me think about Barnaby's article on geophobia, in which suddenly people are talking in political terms.
Bye, Sam.
And so the other side of that question is also, is it just the case that all that's gone in between because people are framing it or understanding it in cultural terms, fascism and communism are the only languages we have available to us on a mass scale to think about the question of politics itself. Yeah, those are the questions I had.
Do you want me to go? Is it my turn?
Go ahead, sorry.
Well, there's so much on the table, you know, and I certainly want to first say that I think the account Richard gives, the kind of texture of a kind of inchoate fascism, as he's calling it, is very, very interesting and persuasive. But I still am left with the question of wondering about the influence, and as it relates to your question, Annie.
Well, they're
in some
probably
ways,
misdefining it, Mark.
the apocalypticism, the sort of generalized.
Listen, Mark, what you got to understand is that these people will use whatever definition serves their purpose. So when we're listening to socialism, like, you cannot assume that definitions they are giving are accurate, because the 4 goals of the woke left are always and forever gain as much power as possible, destabilize the system, attack capitalism, usher in a Marxist utopia. Those are always their goals. Every single thing they do is designed to achieve one or more of those goals. Again, gain as much power as possible, destabilize the system, attack capitalism, usher in a Marxist utopia. They are perfectly willing to screw with language, to redefine terms, to create their own terms that have no basis in reality at all, in order to gain as much power as possible, destabilize the system, attack capitalism, and usher in their Marxist utopia. So when we're talking about like definitions, you always need to keep this in mind, because when it comes to these people, we're not talking about the real definition. We're not talking about what it says in the dictionary. We're talking about what they believe or what they're arguing it says. And these people are completely and totally willing to change the definition of something if it allows them to gain as much power as possible, destabilize the system, attack capitalism, usher in a Marxist utopia. So that would be where I would focus, is not so much in trying to reconcile what these people are saying with what is real, because what these people are saying cannot be reconciled with what is real. Does that make sense? I hope that made sense. We instead want to make sure that we're trying to understand the arguments that they're making, but with the understanding that those arguments are not going to be grounded in reality. So what's going to happen is it's going to create some cognitive dissonance, because you're like, I know what fascism means. Fascism means X. They are defining fascism correctly. Well, no, they're not defining it correctly. They're not defining it correctly in any way. But you have to kind of hold that thought, hold those two thoughts at the same time, and remember that their goal is not to be hinged into reality. Their goal is to gain as much power as possible, destabilize the system, attack capitalism, usher in their Marxist utopia. I do have sponsors, Ultra Mega. It's called Super Chats. If you want to send me in a Super Chat for to buy some tasty beverages, that would be most welcome.
Kind of foreclosure of futurity. What we might say the sort of the kind of well, you've written about this in the Twittering machine to some degree, the kind of the generalization of antagonistic production. You know, the sort of the sense that we live in a world where the best we can do is redistribute injustice, not justice, but really kind of level down. I mean, Annie's written about Afro-pessimism. Is Afro-pessimism a kind of incipient fascism? I mean, I'm being provocative by saying that, you know. But the point I'm trying to make here is that the weirdness of our moment is partly what you're describing, in the sense that these different dimensions, we could think of the lone wolf violence, or the the kind of stochastic terror, or even taking it back to the kind of early 2000s, when you had that kind of similar kind of young men from within the West. It wasn't that long ago that you had a big bombing in Manchester. So these tendencies of these kind of disintegrative tendencies, these tendencies towards what you've called, or what Wendy Brown's called, kind of sociophobic behavior, and then the way they're channeled through our kind of social media sphere.
Excellent. I'll look forward to that.
And almost give rise to, again, this kind of more sort of generalized antagonism, that can take the character of what now people have talked of, say, in terms of cancel culture, or a kind of eliminationist desire, kind of an expression of eliminationist desire, or a suggestion that someone else is interested in my elimination, and therefore they are fascist, or whatever they might be. I mean, these are tendencies that don't have a particular political valence, right? They're not only being organized on the right, and so that sometimes brings about my hesitancy when there's a kind of a challenge to think about how coherent this is. So not only is it inchoate, but it has these kind of very sort of strange and estranging dimensions to it. And I mean, the anon aspect of it is also significant there, in the sense that one doesn't always know what one's dealing with, right? And who one's dealing with. So it has a kind of also a strange virtual quality. So I stick by the claim I made in my earlier remarks that there's less political violence in this moment, tangibly, but there's much more rhetorical violence, and there's much more kind of threat inflation, and there's a sense, as you've put it, that that some other shoe is going to drop somewhere, right? And it's going to be a catastrophe. But the organized forms of violence that exist, that we know persist, and they are on a massive scale. It's the border regime, it's the police regime, and it's the military regime, right? And these kinds of violence have persisted. They've been challenged in certain ways, I think, very, very formidably now. I think for the first time in my lifetime, we have a coherent critique of American militarism that has a little bit of a foothold in the discourse. There's obviously been a very strong police and prison reform movement that has now been radicalized toward abolition politics. The question of the politics of the border is a little bit in suspension. I think under Trump, there was a sort of sense that, as Barnaby put it, the border politics were fascistic, and now it's Biden's border politics, and it's just kind of ordinary management. How that impasse gets broken is unclear to me, right? So I sort of, maybe I'm thinking sort of in two kind of structural terms for the sort of purposes of this discussion, but I keep coming back to that, right? And the sense that we're still in some ways in the world of there is no alternative. We're still in the world of if the liberal center doesn't reorganize things, it's going to be something much, much worse.
They believe there should be open borders.
Within that, the left is then put in this funny position, because on the one hand, we're imagining a kind of fascist horizon, and then we're really sort of starting to be a little bit more practical about what it means.
I'm going to be honest, though, about the border thing, and this is going to be something that people on the right don't want to hear. So people on the right are pretty much the only people who care about the border stuff. I know this is not what you want to hear. I know you're going to say we can't have open borders, stuff like that. Well, you know, there's a valid argument to be had there. However, people on the right are quite literally the only people who care about this. People on the left do not care about the border in any way. A lot of libertarians don't care about the border. Or if they do care about the border, and there are open borders libertarians and there are closed borders libertarians, there are arguments to be made on both sides. But even if libertarians are more closed border libertarian, that belief is significantly less important to them than like 9,000 other things. So it's at the very bottom of their list of priorities. They might say they care about it, but they care about ending the Fed, like, you know, abolishing the IRS, foreign wars. They care about that way more than they do about the border. The reason that I'm saying this is that, again, I'm acknowledging that I think things are not being run as well as they probably could be. However, every single time the right harps on the border and harps on immigration, you have got to understand that you are losing voters. I'm not suggesting that you abandon the issue entirely. I'm not suggesting that you don't make the argument when it makes sense. But when your entire campaign becomes about the fucking border, you are going to lose supporters. And this is the type of thing that's going to get you blocked in my chat because you're not listening. If you want to lose every major election for the rest of your life, bro, keep running your fucking mouth. For right now, you're going to get put in a timeout because you insulted me, and I don't like that. So if you guys want to lose elections, keep hammering on the border. I promise you, it will be an amazing way to lose elections because you are focusing on an issue that the majority of people do not care about. Or they care about several other things that are more important to them than the border. You could be focusing on education. That's an issue people care about. You could be focusing on what's going on in the schools. That's an issue people care about. You can focus on cutting taxes. That's something people care about. You can focus on, I don't know, any number of issues that most people care about more than the border. If you continue to hammer on the border all day, every day, you will lose elections because it is not the number one priority for most people.
To engage in bourgeois politics again, to eke out certain kinds of gains that have in some ways eluded us in the past. And I think those gains are accruing to some degree, although I wouldn't be Pollyannish about it at all, you know, because I think that ultimately the Build Back Better program, the sort of effort to sort of shift away from.
Hang on. The border issue may matter from a practical perspective. From a perspective of getting votes, it does not matter. Everyone who already agrees with you on this issue is on your side. You will gain exactly 0 votes. Remember, elections are won by getting votes. Elections are not won by feelings. Elections are not won by logic. Elections are won by getting votes. You'll gain 0 votes from continuing to hammer on the border because everyone who agrees with you is already on your side. So you gain nothing. Hammer on schools, hammer on education, hammer on any number of things that could be considered bipartisan issues. But if you take up the airtime to talk about the border, you're going to lose. I promise you, you're going to lose.
From a kind of a set of neoliberal governing priorities when it comes to public spending. I mean, these are ultimately still in question. And although they seem to have progressed further under Biden than they did under Obama, it's really not clear how this is going to play out. So I think that there's more of a sense institutionally and socially, for me, that this is a moment of the left's opportunity from a position of relative weakness still, and that the right, I mean, the right is in a kind of chaos, and that does not mean that.
Well, guess what, JC? It's not 2015 anymore. It's 8 years later. And in 8 years later, you guys have lost every single intervening election. You lost in 2018. You lost in 2020. You lost in 2022. So you can reminisce about the old days of 2015 when you guys had one election victory in a generation and it was by sheer dumb fucking luck. You can reminisce about the good old days all you like. But the fact is that it is not 2015. It is 2023. And you guys have not had an electoral win since 2016. Do you hear that? You have not had one major electoral win since 2016. So it might be time to start living in the present and moving on and acknowledging that you live in a completely different time. And if you play by the rules in 2015, you are going to lose again. All right, guys, I need to run to the little socialist room. All right. So what I'm going to do while I'm gone for 2 minutes to the, well, JC, listen, I think it's really stunning and brave of you to admit openly that you want to lose every major election for the rest of your life. No, I will not go back and look at the polls from 8 fucking years ago. The polls from 8 fucking years ago are not the same thing as the polls today. But I do think it's completely brave of you to admit openly to all of us that you are perfectly comfortable in losing every major election for the rest of your life. It's, you know, at least we know where we stand, right? But anyway, I need to go to the little socialist room. I'm going to let the video play, and I will be back in 2 minutes. And it is the responsibility of everyone in the chat to tell me what I missed. I have no problem with pit bulls at all. Just don't teach them to be fighting dogs. Just treat them nice and make them nice, and don't let them bite people. And I have no problem with it. All right, guys, I'll be right back.
There aren't very threatening features to the landscape now that is inchoately organized on the right. Very threatening features. But it's hard for me to see, or for any of us to really know how this is going to play out. And a lot of this is going to really depend upon how successful we are in this moment. I was going to use the word restore, which is the wrong word because I think it gives away the problem. I guess in transforming the kind of governing compact, and both domestically and in terms of the kind of the levels of international cooperation that we're going to need to address climate change and the endemic pandemic and so forth. And I'm not optimistic about that. So in that sense, I think we're thrown back on this conversation talking about the right, but the right is no better prepared to seize on this moment than we are, is I guess where I would end. I know that was a bit muddled in some ways, and I'm not sure I really answered the question that Annie posed, but perhaps it will open up lines of our continued dialogue here.
See, I told you guys I'd be back fast. I'm fast like a bunny when we go to the little socialist room. So what I did here while I was away is this guy saying that the right is, yeah. What I missed. We have no clue about a goddamn thing. Well, that tends to be true. That tends to be true, doesn't it? No, but I did hear the guy from NYU say that, like, basically the right has no doesn't have any better chance than the left does. He is right about that. Again, he's right in every possible. The fact that we were talking about making decisions today based on polling data from 2015 is a pretty damn near good indication of that. All right, guys, mount that like button for me. I'm about ready to have another beer. Maybe the one I pick this time will be red. Who knows? It was a quiz. I wanted to see if you guys were paying attention.
I want to pick up if my connection allows me, because my internet's been appalling.
Oh,
if I
shut
cut
up,
off, then Ellie's going to come in instead. But I want to pick up on one of the last things that you just said about the right not having answers. And much of our discussion has been, and much of the discussion of contemporary right politics is about its pessimism, its kind of nostalgia, sentimentality. These are the normal tropes that we use.
Oh, shit.
Right.
Barnaby might be on the verge of saying something that I agree with. And I don't like it. I don't like that I'm about to agree with this asshole. What I think Barnaby is going to say is the right doesn't have a really clear vision for, like, what they want to do and a positive, optimistic vision for the future. The right only bitches and complains about everything that they don't like, and they have a nostalgia for a past that never actually existed. And I think he's right. And it's like when the worst person in the world makes a really good point, and you're like, and you hate it. I'm about to hate this moment. I know it.
Today. And one of the questions that Annie mentioned in the chat, we've got some great questions we'll get to. One of the questions in the chat was about the relationship between Nazism and utopianism versus the relationship between Trump and utopianism, which I take to be a provocation about a kind of difference, because fascism in the 1930s was often very optimistic. I mentioned Mussolini's cult of youth versus the kind of trope about Trumpism being a movement of the old. So this is different in France, and I wonder what you think about as a potential difference. So we're familiar on the left with talking about differences between fascism then and now in terms of the spectre of communist revolution and the 10 years of
a red beer. Yay!
But is there a meaningful difference between a politics that's quite utopian, perhaps, about the creation of a new, tied to a moment of modernism and in futurism, a new national community, also then tied to aggressive war as a moment of, think of the importance in Germany of someone like Ernst Junger, war as a kind of cleansing moment of renewal and discovery for the young, for the brave young men who got to fight, and for the nation making itself through imperial conquest. Trump as isolationist against the Bush dynasty. So is there, Nikhil has written about the need to think about the inner and the outer war, domestic and global, in American right-wing politics. So to both of you, I guess Richard first, I'm interested in what you think about this dominant characterization of the right now, and Nikhil just touched on it in closing by talking about the right perhaps not having answers. This dominant characterization of the right now as backward-looking. Above all, that's the kind of liberal frame, and it's also frequently the left frame. Is it right? It may be. If so, is it very different from fascism as a modernist movement of renewal, which fused a lot of, I mentioned Franco in my introduction, it fused a lot of heavy traditionalism, obviously, with a sense about the kind of particular synthesis of the traditional rediscovered through the modern dictatorial state.
I cannot understand what Barnaby is saying at all.
Is that optimism of the early 20th century moment
or indeed perhaps of Pinochet, fighting the spectre of communism, but also bringing in the Chicago boys to transform the country with a particular vision of modernity. Is that different from a right-wing politics now that is backward-looking? And does that also relate to its orientation to imperialism being often, this is true of Trump, it's true of Le Pen, much more isolationist? It's true of some of the Brexiteers that I know at all. Much more isolationist than ambitiously globalist thinking. Is there a shift from optimism to pessimism?
So in terms of the question, I mean, there's a number of different issues here. Number one, there's the question of utopianism on the right. Now, again, this comes back to the question of at what stage of development does this utopian ideology persist? Because if you think about an organization, not an organization, but a contagion like QAnon, whoever was manipulating that, and it does seem to have been sort of far-right entrepreneurs involved in the social industry at various levels. But whoever was manipulating that, certainly there, if you read the QAnon bestsellers, and they are bestsellers, some of them, they combine very strange kind of sort of
what are the QAnon bestsellers?
Discourse in the sort of mold of 90s alt culture, in the mold of the elites don't care about us. And we would not be divided by greed and racism if it wasn't for those terrible elites, that kind of stuff. And then, of course, that builds up to the idea that we're going to have a day of reckoning. There's going to be a storm. There's going to be an awakening. There's going to be a coup. Trump is going to round up political enemies in the streets. He's going to execute them in the streets. He's going to send them to Guantanamo Bay. He's going to have Hillary Clinton strung up. And we will purge the world of evil forever. We will purge the world of all the child molesting Satan worshippers who have been turning us against one another. So I think you can talk in that sense about a kind of utopian thinking, although it doesn't have anything like the ideological sort of cultivatedness, the preparedness that, say, Volkish nationalism with its various roots did have in 1920s and 1930s Germany. So that's one thing to say. The other thing to say is I don't buy that this is purely a backward-looking movement. I mean, of course, its demographics suggest that there's an attempt to conserve something, to ward off something.
No,
I mean,
there's no attempt to conserve anything. No, there's not.
The conservative
in any
element
way.
of
No.
being on the far right. But a big part of its appeal, wherever you look, Trump, Bolsonaro, Modi, Duterte, wherever you look, it's an appeal to an ideal of aggressive developmentalism, capitalist developmentalism, throwing off the shackles of political correctness, of human rights legislation, of all these enfeebling liberal bourgeois ideas that stop people from achieving what they can achieve. And of course, in that context, the culture wars over.
You know what I think allows me to achieve what I want to achieve? Capitalism. I think capitalism is pretty great. I think capitalism is so amazing that it allows me to provide a service out to people in the world, and people who want that service pay me money for that service. And I can utilize that to live a better life, to make sure that I have the things around me that I want, to have security for myself and my family, to go on vacations, to have experiences. That's all because of capitalism. It ain't because of socialism, honey. I get to work for myself because of capitalism. Capitalism is amazing. Capitalism is the best.
Coronavirus and social distancing and the sort of social Darwinist ethic at the heart of that makes perfect sense. So it's not about sort of restoring a pristine past. And quite often, if you look at, just take Trump. He's not trying to restore 1950s whiteness. I think this is a big mistake that liberals make, that he's trying to restore.
As a reminder, for people who are new, whiteness is not about your skin color. Whiteness means capitalism. Every time you hear one of these people say whiteness or white supremacy, they mean capitalism. Every time. It doesn't matter what the color of your skin is. These people don't care about the color of your skin at all because they completely redefined racism to make it be something more akin to systemic racism. You know what they think that the basis of systemic racism is? Slavery. Do you know what they think slavery was based on? Capitalism. They think the root core of all racism is capitalism, which is why anytime they say whiteness at all, they don't mean skin color, they mean capitalism. The enemy of critical race theorists and anyone that believes in critical consciousness and all of that is not white people. They love white people who agree with them. They love Robin DiAngelo. They lifted Robin DiAngelo up on a pedestal for years. They hate black people who disagree with them. They called Larry Elder the black face of white supremacy. It is not about your skin color. It's only about capitalism. And capitalism does rule. Absolutely. Oh, yeah, Robin DiAngelo is totally insane. 100%. Yes.
Or, it's a sort of 1950s gender norms and sort of racial norms and sexual norms and so on. To the contrary, he's trying to create a new kind of racial project,
we got that right at least.
One which is capable of cutting across in different ways.
I appreciate it.
Sort of various traditionally constituted racial constituencies in the United States. Obviously, they went hard for a certain section of the Latino vote. But he did, they targeted a certain section of black voters. Obviously, in terms of his sexual politics, although Trump passed transphobic legislation, he didn't try and turn the clock back on, say, homosexuality.
Trump doesn't
even
care
though
about
he's
gay
sort of
people.
strongly reliant upon the white evangelical vote. It sort of feels like there's an attempt to generate new forms of race making and new forms of sexual politics, which are rooted in particularly contemporary forms of crisis. And the way to understand those contemporary forms of crisis, particularly as regards sexuality, is to look at the sexual politics of the MRAs, of the incel forums, and the ways in which those are rooted not in the idea per se that these red women, like these Rosa Luxemburgs are going to come and tear down patriarchal authority and destroy our families, but in the idea that we've lost our fathers, and because of that we can't get laid. This is essentially the idea of the MRAs and the incel forums, that the father figure doesn't exist anymore, and that because the father figure doesn't exist anymore, there's a free-for-all, there's sexual competition, and only a small handful of very fit, attractive men seems to be getting off with all these women, leaving the rest of these poor lonely men, to wither and die. And so there's a kind of obviously that lends itself to a kind of apocalyptic ideology as well. But there's a kind of sense that some new form of distributive justice has to be imposed, and obviously organized along extremely sexist gendered lines, but some form of distributive justice with regard to sex, as if that was even possible. But this is not the sort of problem that they faced in 1930s Germany. If anything, whereas the problem today is that there's been a collapse, I mean, I'm overstating this, but a decline in libido. There's been, obviously surveys are picking up that younger people are less interested in sex, they're having it less often, they're dating less often, etc., etc., etc. I don't know if this is worthy of a moral panic, but it is a trend, and it's one that's affecting different groups of people differently, and the MRAs, I suspect, are partly a response to that. In 1920s and 1930s Germany, to the contrary, the problem was to roll back sexual repression to, I mean, this was, if you look at Dagmar Herzog's work on sexuality in the Third Reich and, among interwar fascists, you find it again and again that there's this dual process of sexual liberalization on the one hand, for Aryans, as it were, and of course, new sexual restrictions, and indeed, murderous sexual restrictions for anybody not belonging to that national community. But so it wasn't. Whereas the struggle now, apparently, on the far right is to have some new form of prohibition that institutes some form of scarcity, some form of distributive justice. In the 1920s and 1930s, particularly in regard to the Third Reich, the idea seemed to be to roll back inherited religious prohibitions and to encourage people, particularly young people, to have lots and lots of sex. Strength through joy was the slogan, but it was essentially a slogan of racial supremacy. It was the slogan of the sexual pleasure that Aryans were entitled to. So in other words, what I'm saying is that there's a sense in which we underestimate the modernizing,
Aryans were entitled to,
or at least the forward-looking components of this new far right. One other thing, in regard to the question of whether or not we're seeing a decline in political violence on the streets. I expect we're talking about street violence here. Certainly, it's an open question with regard to police violence, but I understand it's declined from, say, the era of Jim Crow. But one thing that I thought was quite interesting about the insurrectionists, the so-called insurrectionists, was that the majority of them were not vets. The majority of them were not members of militias. The majority of them were not traditional supporters of the far right. They were people who had, whereas the typical sort of lone wolf fascist in the 2000s would have been a sort of younger, unemployed male. These guys were disproportionately affluent professionals or business owners who had suffered a drastic decline in their fortunes, probably since 2008, the credit crunch, etc., and who basically were threatened with being hurled back.
Wait, sorry, I wasn't paying attention to the stream. I was paying attention to something different. Do you know what I just found out? So, can I react to MAAFA 21 from Live Action for Friday? What is that? I don't know what that is. Hang on. MAAFA 21 Live Action. Okay, if I can figure out what it is, maybe I'll have to look it up. But what I did find out. Okay. So do you guys know how, like, I'm in real life pro-choice? Like, I am completely fine. Like, I have a pretty reasonable pro-choice position. Like, I think that 3 months with exceptions for rape, incest, and life of the mother is sufficient for the vast majority of people. I also think it allows us to keep our humanity. I also think it's a compromise. I think that most women are going to be completely fine with that. Well, when I was fake running for governor in New Hampshire, because I wasn't really running for governor, but for those who don't know, I was the Libertarian Party of New Hampshire nominee for governor of New Hampshire, but it wasn't real. It was literally just to put a name on a ballot. And I said, if I don't have to do anything, I'll do it. And like, no one else wanted to do it. And so I was like, fine, I will put my name on the ballot, but I'm not going to do anything. So it was a completely fake campaign. I didn't even raise money or anything. But because I was the official, like, party candidate for governor, occasionally I would get people emailing me and asking me questions, and I would answer them because, like, why not? And one of those people who emailed me and asked me questions like 2 days before the election was a woman named Amy Littlefield. And then Amy Littlefield, well, yes, we did work our butts off getting signatures. We did do that, but I didn't like campaign for real or anything. So Amy Littlefield wrote a fucking hit piece on me about my position on abortion like 2 days before the election. And I'm like, bitch, I am legitimately pro-choice. You can't come out and say I'm a pro-life nut job. I am not pro-life. I have never been pro-life, but she did it anyway because she's like, she's not pro-abortion enough. Well, I was actually the most pro-life option, which is funny. I was both pro-choice and the most pro-life option at the same time. Well, I have just found out that Amy Littlefield has done a presentation. Hang on, I need to find the actual. There it is. Do you know what this is? This is the Institute for the Study of Male Supremacy at the University of California at Berkeley. They actually have a whole center that studies male supremacy at Berkeley. We've watched some of their stuff on incels before. And I have just discovered that fucking Amy Littlefield did a presentation for the Center for the Study of Male Supremacy at UC Berkeley called Anti-Abortion Strategy. And it's on tape. And we can watch it. So I was excited about that because fuck Amy Littlefield. It was one of those random things where it's like when you see these worlds kind of collide and you're like, okay, you're obviously a socialist. Thank you. So that was what made me gasp. I was like, legitimately, I was like, Amy Littlefield. All right. All right. Anyway, no, we're not watching it now, but we do have to watch it at some point. We really do. We really do. All right. Back to the presentation. Not everyone's here to go on my sidetracks. I understand that. Guys, you are watching Socialism Saturday. We are watching a presentation from 1 year ago about the rise of fascism in 21st century America. And we're still trying to figure out exactly how the socialists define fascism. We haven't quite gotten there yet. Maybe we will. We have about 40 minutes left of this presentation. So please mount that like button for me. We do this every Saturday at 6 p.m.
Into the status of ordinary humanity, struggling humanity, just like the rest of us, and didn't take to it well. And so they had become radicalized over the years to the point where through various, online vectors, obviously QAnon was one of them, various militias. It's interesting that a lot of the new militias are being organized as Facebook groups in the first place, etc. That they were radicalized into the idea that they, through their efforts, were sufficient to overthrow this what they regarded as an elite, a clique, a plot of Satan worshippers, etc. And if only a few thousand of them turned up with guns and plenty of ammo and plastic handcuffs, they would be able to overthrow this political power. Obviously, that kind of voluntarism doesn't speak well of their political experience or anything like that. But this brings me to the final point that I want to make and see if I can link this back to some of what you said. I think a lot of what's been happening, wherever you're talking, Brazil, the Philippines, the United States, various European countries, etc. You're talking about, I think, an experimental phase in far-right politics. In other words, they don't quite know what they can get away with yet. And when they take office, again, it's a pedagogical process. They don't quite know what they're able to do with office because they haven't been in power in this way for a long, long time. My sort of thinking on this is somewhat informed by the strategy of the French Front National. When they essentially decided that in order to mainstream, they would have to give up the sort of themes and slogans that were associated with the Third Reich and the Pétain period and so on, and would have to win the trust of the bourgeoisie. They would have to win the trust of the capitalist class, show that they were capable of governing, and win allies within the media. In other words, that only through experiencing periods in office would they be able to start to push at the boundaries and find ways in which they could accelerate what we're calling fascisation? Obviously, Trump, Bolsonaro, etc., are nowhere near as programmatic as this. I think, insofar as Trump can be called a fascist, if you want to call him that, it's largely sort of instinctual, it's unconscious. But there's a sense in which they are experimenting with the mainstreaming of far-right ideas and with the mainstreaming of political violence on the streets. And I think that process sort of explains some of what we've been seeing, the unevenness that we've been seeing, both their weaknesses and their surprising popular resilience, the ways in which they seem able to ride out crises that might have been terminal for any other administration. Sorry, again, that's a little bit sprawling and confused. Annie, I see that you have your hand up.
Thanks so much, Richard. No, that's really interesting, and I feel bad, but I kind of want to pivot. And one of the other themes that we had discussed, also just thinking about, well, I guess it connects. So in two ways. Firstly, you mentioned a little while ago about Trump crossing lines in terms of bourgeois civility, and it's making me think about the kind of Caesarean account of fascism as simply sort of colonial procedures being applied to Europe. And if we think about the contrast of the like overt, knowable in the Western sphere, racism, racial science of the Nazi regime, of like European fascisms, counterposed with the bourgeois civility of the imperial project of, or the project of empire, whilst also masking unknown kind of untold horrors and violence. And so that's got me thinking about how that contrast seems to continue, right? Between the kind of neoliberal form, which is happy to continue to sponsor the rise of the far right across the kind of global periphery, is happy to continue with imperialist aggression, at the same time as positioning itself in opposition to the incivility of Trump. And I wonder if that also gets at the heart of something deeper in our politics or our moment, about the elevation of the rhetoric, or the elevation of rhetoric over action, and the significance of these new languages of linguistic violences, or kind of discursive violences, over the continued existence of gross exploitation across the world. So that's one side of the question. The other side of the question, I really kind of want to draw out this analysis that I kind of hinted at the beginning from George Jackson. We're talking about the role of carcerality in the carceral state. I guess we're in a moment in which rhetorically we've got all of, I guess this is a good example, rhetorically we've got all of the trappings of a radicalizing abolitionist movement, of the spread of abolitionist ideas. That's also happening at a time in which one of the first things Biden does is license hundreds of millions for the police in order to kind of train themselves, right? And so thinking about how, as discursively we move towards revolutionary frames, in whatever kind of staccato, patchy way that is, but also we also seem to materially, in terms of the orientation of the state to us, be moving further and further away from the actual realization of those aims. And so what is this relationship between rhetoric and action? I don't know. I'll go to Nikhil first, just because I'm thinking about this question of policing, and I've seen you. You're muted.
Thanks. I think we've had this rebellion, against the police, and we've had efforts over many years, which developed during the Trump administration, or really going back to Ferguson in 2014, of attempting to make institutional changes at the heart of the punitive apparatus with the election of these progressive district attorneys. And one can ask a question about the viability of that strategy, but people like Larry Krasner in Philadelphia and Chesa Boudin in San Francisco and Kim Foxx in Chicago and many who have been elected on a criminal justice reform platform. So which includes ending prosecutions for misdemeanors, nonviolent offenses, drug offenses, ending the use of cash bail so that people aren't held in prison, attempting to already begin a process of using non-police kind of civilian intervention in different kinds of situations, for example, like domestic conflict situations and so forth, all of which is part of a much more detailed and comprehensive effort to rethink what public safety could look like without the police, without the centrality of police, without the centrality of punishment, without the centrality of prison. Now, this is obviously a very rich social movement. It's a rich set of intellectual discussions. It's a rich politics, and in a country where 77 million people have arrest records, and where 1 in 50 people is under criminal state supervision, it's an extraordinary struggle, and it really is significant, and it has gained a tremendous impetus in the last 10 years. But I would also say that we're in the midst of a pretty rapidly developing counter movement, a sense that this has already gone far enough. They weren't able to throw Larry Krasner out of office, but they tried to, and the Democratic Party did not support him. There's been a movement to recall some of these prosecutors in other cities. The Supreme Court is rattling off decision after decision that continues to uphold the most punitive elements of the punishment regime that we have developed over the last 30 years. The talk now is of crime rising. There's the potential that New York City could elect a tough on crime mayor. I don't know if it will happen, but this is going to be an interesting test. If Eric Adams is elected, he's a African-American, former policeman who's very, very pro-police and believes we need more police, and maybe even believes we should bring back stop and frisk. I'm not sure. He wouldn't go as far as to say that, but he's been attacking some of the other candidates for being either soft on crime or in favor of defunding the police or disarming the police, which suggests that he thinks it's a winning political issue in this moment. In New York City, where we had massive protests a year ago against police violence. So there's something about this situation right now that's very much in flux. And it's, to my thinking, it's really a battle between the left and the liberal center. I don't know where the right is in this discussion right now. At least in New York City, it's not clear where the right is. I think the right, in some ways, rode into the kind of hegemonic phase of power under Reaganism with a war on crime, essentially. But the war on crime does not have the same kind of traction right now that one thinks it might have, even though crime rates and homicide rates in particular have spiked. So to me, that suggests something about the success of the left, of Black Lives Matter, of the kind of movements of the last decade to really change the conversation about criminal punishment. To me, that is really where the center of gravity of any serious anti-fascist politics really occurs. And in a sense, it really is an anti-fascist politics that isn't only directed at the far right. It really is directed at the liberal institutional center that has built this carceral apparatus of this kind of monstrous scale. But the question of what you now do if you're going to really decarcerate, if you're really going to stop locking people up, if you're really going to stop governing the poor through crime control, it remains to be seen. And sort of this is where I'm thrown back to sort of Richard's point about the inchoate fascism, which is to say, it is experimental, but I think it's experimental in a very disordered way. And the disorderliness of it is sort of, it's an open field. And how it coalesces, I probably think it's more inchoate than Richard does. But how it coalesces is going to really depend on the kind of conditions, right? So, for example, will there be the possibility for the GOP to once again peel back the suburban liberals who suddenly got a conscience and a consciousness?
All right, I got to ask you guys a question. This doesn't have to do with the presentation. I wasn't really listening for the last 3 minutes. I have a very, very, very important question. I have just discovered that next Saturday, there is a full day long socialism conference taking place 2 hours away from my house. And this is taking place at Hampshire College in Massachusetts, because of course it's Massachusetts, about 2 hours away from my house. And it's called Collective Power. And it's a full day of socialist presentations. I would have to wear a mask. I am vaccinated, so I actually cover that one. And it costs $300, but I really think this might be possibly the best $300 I've ever spent. I'm really thinking about going. Now, technically, they cut off their registration yesterday, but on the website, it still appears to be open. And I'm pretty sure if I said, I want to give you $300 to go to your conference next weekend, they'd be like, okay, what's your credit card number? Yes, it would mean there would be no makeup bitchcraft next week. But, this might be more important. I don't know how I would spy stream it. I don't know how I would do that. Someone would have to help me. I'd have to get hidden camera by next week. I wonder if Project Veritas could get me a hidden camera by next week. Project Veritas might be able to get me a hidden camera by next week. I know a guy. I know several guys at Project Veritas. I wonder if they can get me a hidden camera by next week. They once offered to send me stuff. No, James O'Keefe is not interested. I know that. I'm not promising anything, all right? I still got to do my taxes between now and next week, okay? But, oh my god, would this be amazing if I could pull this shit off? Nick says, you're going, I'm chipping towards it. Don't tease me, woman, and not give me a happy rest. I can't promise anything. I need to figure it out, and I need to do my taxes in real life. But isn't that exciting? Isn't that exciting? All right, more to come.
Around racial justice. If crime spikes to certain levels, or if there's a sort of sense that, oh no, the left has gone too far with all of this critical race theory stuff, which is really what they're trying to do right now. They're trying to use it as a kind of wedge issue to win the next election. I mean, that's really how race politics works in the United States electorally. It's about the edges of these coalitions and how you can peel them off, right? And right now, racial justice politics has really worked for the Democratic Party. But just as I think in some ways the fascist sort of commitments are thin on the right, the racial justice commitments are very thin on the liberal center. And I think that the
racial justice commitments are very thin on the liberal center. Isn't that interesting? Isn't that an interesting perception from a communist? Huh. Maybe the left isn't all as woke as we think they are if the socialists are like, the moderates, they don't really have a commitment to racial justice. I also just want to say that I'm very pleased at how excited everyone in the chat is about me going to a socialist conference. I feel like that's a good well, I still have to pay the amount though is the problem if I do an extension. I would still have to pay them. And I don't know how much money I owe them because I don't do quarterly taxes. I am a quarterly tax slacker. And the reason that is because I would rather take the $50 penalty at the end of the year and not have to do taxes 4 times a year than to do taxes 4 times a year and not have to pay the $50 penalty. It is a $50 penalty that I am more than willing. Oh, Judy! Really? Taxes are due on the 18th instead of the 15th? I mean, that makes sense. Huh. All right. I'm very excited about all of the enthusiasm over the socialism conference. Thank you guys. This has given me hope.
The aim ultimately of restoring some kind of durable mode of governance, right? Which I think is unlikely to succeed on the part of either party, is very likely to go back to some of the more familiar themes, and I think the more familiar themes really are the themes of law and order, of fiscal discipline, of making sure people are disciplined to work, so labor discipline. 23 states have ended their unemployment benefits prematurely, even though the federal government is offering this money. They clearly don't think they're going to be punished electorally for it by their own citizens. So there's a lot of that kind of rightward movement that I wouldn't characterize as fascist. I would actually characterize as sort of part of the mix of American politics that we've been fighting, for the last generation. And I find that that's where my own attention is drawn when I think about, say, an upcoming election for mayor in New York City, or the kind of work I do with the prison authorities in my own work with people coming out of prison. So it's sometimes I feel mismatched with the discussion, because those tend to be the kind of the grounds of my own concerns. And I think there are more opportunities to push the politics that I believe in from the left. And it's also true, of course, that I live in a particular kind of liberal city where the presence of the far right is not as visible, and a lot of this is geographically incredibly uneven, of course, in a country as vast as the United States. But that's, I guess, my best effort to sort of answer that question. And let me just throw one more thing into the mix here, which is part of that sort of the sort of recomposition of traditional, I would say, conservative or conservative-leaning authority, and that really relates to U.S. foreign policy. And the one place where you secure bipartisanship right now in the United States is around a kind of more aggressive posture towards China. How that is going to develop in the coming years is going to be very, very significant. And the thing about Trump there is also so weird when you think about it, because although Trump definitely believed in a kind of aggressive and militaristic foreign policy, the assassination of Soleimani was a kind of example of that, breaking the norm, but those norms were already broken in some sense by George W. Bush. And in other ways, Trump would say things that actually we should say, that the expansion of NATO is not such a great idea, that the United States was set on a very destructive course by the Clinton era expansion of NATO, and that it's done a lot to sort of erode trust within a kind of kind of a global sphere where we actually need cooperation among parties who may have strong disagreements and divergences of their interests. So Trump, in a certain kind of way, and again, I'm not trying to give him any kind of credit, but he opened up positions that are not straightforwardly right-wing positions on American foreign policy. And there again, I think the liberal center, the kind of what we call the blob, is much more of a danger going forward, because they're much more likely to be able to assemble a kind of
These people always think
kind of
liberals are more
effective
dangerous than
anti-China
conservatives.
policy that really ends up worsening the situation at a global scale,
Always.
rather than sort of moving in the direction that I think we need to be moving. So I feel like these kinds of questions are the questions that we need to be giving more air to. They really are the questions maybe of a more mainstream politics, but I think they're very important.
So I want to come back on some of that, but I want to start with the first part of Annie's question, which had to do with bourgeois civility and the Starian notion of fascism, as essentially the appearance within European society of a mode of political domination.
We agree on that too,
had
Casey.
long been appearing in the colonial world. In other words, Europe's barbarism trickled back into Europe. Okay, well, I think there's a few things we can say about this. First of all, when we talk about civility, obviously there's more than lexical link to the concept of civilization. Bourgeois civility was predicated on a certain idea of civilization, not just in the sense of, developments of technology, the expansion.
Bad news, guys. I can't go to the socialist conference because they're demanding I get a vaccine booster. Do I need to get a letter or something? Unless you qualify for a religious or medical exemption. All right, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to register for it, and I'm going to say I got the primary vaccine. I had a really bad reaction to it. My doctor told me not to get any boosters because I had a really bad effing reaction to it. I'm more than willing to take a COVID test when I get there to prove that I don't have it. It's fine. I gotta get a letter. I gotta get a fucking letter. All right, fine. Fine.
Markets, etc., all that stuff. But crucially, the regulation of human beings, their sexuality, their habits, their mores, their emotions and their emotional expressions, and the ways in which that was fused to an idea of nationhood. George Moss is probably the best author on this subject, and the ways in which sort of emerging molded subjects were linked to their sort of idea of nationhood in the sort of, particularly in the 19th century and early 20th century. So when we talk about civilization and the sort of rupture with bourgeois civility, I think we're not just talking about, Donald Trump saying horrible things about a disabled journalist or, being let off the leash to talk about grabbing pussies or whatever it happens to be. I think that whether it's Duterte, whether it's Modi, whether it's Bolsonaro, whether it's Trump, the coarsening of Moors, the barbarizing of Moors is a deliberate strategy to sort of mainstream violence. In other words, to reorganize political violence. And the way in which I would interpret this is if you understand, if you want a sort of radicalized version of civilization that discontents, Freud is concerned mainly, obviously, with the ways in which civilization limits us in terms of our erotic fulfillment, and in terms of our sort of our aggressive enjoyments. But there's a much more consistent burden of civilization, and that's work. And it's extraordinary that Freud doesn't really talk about this, but work is the major source of stress. It's the major source of deprivation of leisure and enjoyment and relief and so on. It saps your libido, if you want to talk in those terms. Work is unevenly distributed, of course, and its burdens are definitely unevenly distributed. So when you think about how civilization organizes work, you also have to think about the way it organizes compensations. W.E.B. Du Bois talks about the social and psychological wage, which was particularly available to vicious whites who would make a lynching a holiday, essentially. The compensations of being incorporated into the capitalist nation state, with its colonial annexations and so on, were frequently took the form of license. In other words, you're being repressed on every other front, but when you, if you want to oppress somebody, if you want to persecute somebody, there are a group of people that you're free to persecute. And obviously, the civilizing work of social movements, of anti-racist movements, of gay rights movements, and so on, have put severe limitations on those kind of compensations. So you can, you can imagine that no matter how far you were down the ladder in terms of work and in terms of the class system, you could at least be assured that you were not at the bottom if you were able to persecute somebody else. And by and large, if you want to look at where resentful nationalism is coming up today, this is the sort of academic term, and I would say that it's the sort of area in which inchoate fascism is thriving. It's emerging among not just, of course, this isn't just organized along axes of whiteness and gender and all the rest of it, but particularly among those elements of the, well, they would say, sort of lower income groups who aren't quite at the bottom, because those who are at the bottom are more or less immune to this form of resentful nationalist politics. But it's people who are not quite at the bottom, who are somewhat above there, and who are most threatened with downward social mobility. Now, if you take the neoliberal era and what that does to people, on the one hand, by increasing inequality to such a considerable measure, and increasing it across the social hierarchy, so that the inequalities between those in the middle and those at the bottom increase as well, you increase the risks of downward social mobility. You make it much more threatening, much more perilous. On the other hand, of course, if you then introduce some morality, as neoliberalism does, which essentially says, there is no such thing as the public interest. There's no such thing as society in the traditional sense that you've understood it. Anybody who starts talking to you about society and the social interest and the public interest is hoodwinking you. They're engaging in power maximizing strategies. So the only thing that you can do is really submit yourself to this higher power, which is the market. You can never understand it. But you also have to submit yourself to the law of competition, universal competition. And you never know who's going to stab you in the back. So it's an organization, a regime of generalized paranoia. You have to be paranoid about everybody. The social industry, I talk about this in connection with the social industry, but the social industry just radicalizes this sort of tendency that's already afoot in neoliberalism. So when we talk about sociophobia, its substrate is intense social paranoia and anomie. So in that sense, the burdens of civilization are likely to manifest in ideological terms. And Adam Kotsko has a book about this, which I think is very good, in terms of demons. There are demons everywhere. This brings me to a point that Nikhil brought up earlier, which is that these morbid symptoms aren't just appearing on the right. And I think that's a very important and telling point. This sort of generalization of antagonism, of threat exaggeration, etc., has appeared on the left as well. So it's not specifically fascistic tendency. And what I would say about that is that, of course, that's true, but that indeed, one of the things about fascism historically is that when it does congeal, when it does pass into a more solid state, one of the first things that happens is that a lot of people who've never voted for the right before suddenly flock to the right. People who would traditionally have considered themselves as being on the left migrate to fascism.
What?
And I think that
doesn't even make any sense.
Probably tells us something
Wait,
about.
Is he really arguing? Maybe I'm just not paying close enough attention. Okay, fine. But is he really arguing that fascism is so appealing to people on the left that when fascism rises on the right, that Democrats will be so enticed by fascism that they will leave the left to vote for the right because they're in favor of fascism? Is that what he's arguing? I know there's a delay in the chat, so I'm just going to wait for either confirmation or denial. And you guys are free to tell me I'm wrong if I'm wrong. But it kind of sounds like this guy is arguing that fascism is so appealing that Democrats just can't help themselves but to leave the left and vote for the right when the right embraces fascism. And that, to me, doesn't make a lot of sense on several different levels. Okay, I'll rewind it. We'll listen again. We're almost done, so we can go back a little bit.
Much more perilous. On the other hand, of course, if you then introduce some morality, as neoliberalism does, which essentially says there is no such thing as the public interest. There's no such thing as society in the traditional sense that you've understood it. Anybody who starts talking to you about society and the social interest and the public interest is hoodwinking you. They're engaging in power maximizing strategies. So the only thing that you can do is really submit yourself to this higher power, which is the market. You can never understand it. But you also have to submit yourself to the law of competition, universal competition. And you never know who's going to stab you in the back. So it's an organization, a regime of generalized paranoia. You have to be paranoid about everybody. The social industry, I talk about this in connection with the social industry, but the social industry just radicalizes this sort of tendency that's already afoot in neoliberalism. So when we talk about sociophobia, its substrate is intense social paranoia and anomie. So in that sense, the burdens of civilization are likely to manifest in ideological terms. And Adam Kotsko has a book about this, which I think is very good, in terms of demons. There are demons everywhere. This brings me to a point that Nikhil brought up earlier, which is that these morbid symptoms aren't just appearing on the right. And I think that's a very important and telling point. This sort of generalization of antagonism, of threat exaggeration, etc., has appeared on the left as well.
Hang on.
So it's not specifically.
We're getting to the meat of it. But Brooklyn Way is saying I'm wrong. He's saying, no, he is not. He was taking a dig at Walkaway and anyone who leaves the left. It was a gaslight. He was gaslighting comrades who defect. That may be Brooklyn Way. I can see that point of view. Absolutely.
Fascistic tendency. And what I would say about that is that, of course, that's true.
But hang on. Brooklyn Way's got another one. I knew she would. Oh, wait. No, it's the same one. Brooklyn Way, you sent the same super chat twice. I appreciate the double super chat, my friend.
indeed, one of the things about fascism historically is that when it does congeal, when it does pass into a more solid state, one of the first things that happens is that a lot of people who've never voted for the right before suddenly flock to the right. People who would traditionally have considered themselves as being on the left migrate to fascism. And I think that this probably tells us something about the sort of fascistic potential. The fact that you're on the left doesn't inherently mean that you're inoculated against this potential. Insofar as it's something that's rooted in civilization, or rather the dialectic of civilization and decivilization. So what I would say in concluding therefore, is that what the sort of militia movements, the BJP, the RSS, the sort of paramilitaries in Brazil, and various incipient organizations, the far right, etc., what they all seem to offer is a renewed form of consolation. In other words, they offer a cure for pervasive depression and social desolation in the form of a new victimization. Modi talks about it. I mean, actually, wherever these leaders come to power, they're always talking about mental and emotional uplift. They're talking about the renewal of the spirit. They're not just talking about, yes, they're talking about capitalist growth, they're talking about saving the nation from its enemies, yada, yada, but crucially, they're talking to very, very intensely depressed people and offering
most people on the left are very, very intensely depressed, for sure.
Whatever you're going through, you're much, much better than this group of people, be it, say, Muslims in India or, migrants in the United States or whatever it happens to be. And so I think that is a compensation that is much more potent than anything that's offered by the neoliberal happiness industry. And it's much more, and it's, by the way, it's, I think I have to stress in concluding that this is a material interest. We tend to think of material interests, in the tradition of gas and water socialism. You offer people bread, you offer people a bit more money, you offer people nationalized utilities. That certainly counts for something, but so does your happiness on a day-to-day level. And the fact that the far-right social industry, and the fact that far-right celebrities, and the fact that far-right incitement campaigns are so addictive, despite apparently terrifying people and telling people that a disaster is coming, suggests that it's so highly engaging, animating, and ultimately for those people, and to that extent, mentally ameliorating process. I think that that's where bourgeois civility and decivility comes in. I think it's, basically this is a radicalized version of civilization
several times now
that I'm offering here as an analysis.
I feel like I need to look up. I'm just making this note for myself right now. Bourgeois, hang on, bourgeois civility. I need to find out what that means.
Just want to kind of follow up with one additional thing on that, because I think it's a really interesting point, and I'm also thinking about some of your other work, especially in the Torturing Machine, but just thinking about how much of this is grounded in the absolute alienation of finding community in essence online, and the way in which we're engaging in a democratic or kind of, the like general kind of political community. And I'm thinking about early critics of Prevent who were coming mostly from the center and center right, who are pointing out that all of the evidence suggests that radicalization at the moment is happening in internet chat rooms across the political spectrum, in internet chat rooms where people are lonely and isolated. And so how much of the absolute alienation of the online space is kind of playing a part in this generalized depression.
The evil internet chat rooms.
And it's go on, Richard.
Oh well,
we are
over time, but the conversation is very good. So so go on, Richard, and then we'll wrap up.
I'll be very brief then. All I wanted to say in response to that is that I think that if you look at someone like Breivik, what Breivik sort of found, and what a lot of these lone wolf fascists find, is that in these fora, they are legends. Even though, they're completely anonymized, they adopt the persona of sort of computer game legends, and they're talked about or talk about themselves as if they are sort of highly important, mythical, historical figures. I don't think that the alienation begins in these chat rooms. I think that the alienation is already pervasive, utterly pervasive, and that the chat rooms are...
I want to play off something Kurt is saying. Sin, you made it. We're about to wrap up, but you made it for the very end. Kurt says, government school made me the anarchist I am today. At some point I realized nothing intended to be good could possibly be so bad. So the bad had to be deliberate. So it's actually funny, Kurt, because I was at this libertarians women's movie night thing like a couple weeks ago. And it was really great. It was like 60 women in New Hampshire. We got together and watched a movie called No Men Beyond This Point, which was actually like a really good movie, and I highly recommend it. I think it's on Netflix. But at the movie night, I talked to a couple of homeschool kids. These are kids that are like 15, 16 years old. They go to Latitudes, which is kind of like a pod learning thing. It's not like a real school. It's like an unschool type of thing. And I asked them, I was like, how do you feel about public school versus like what you're doing now? And they were like, these are kids. These are teenagers. They're like, public school is bullshit. It's all busy work. We hated it. We're learning so much now. This is so much better. We're so grateful we're not in public school anymore. These kids were so much smarter than I was at their age. Like it was like I've actually never talked to like kids that are in that type of program before. So I was really, really impressed with how much smarter they are than like normal people their age.
Or rather, the social industry more generally offers a cure that, in a sense, makes it a lot worse, because it offers you a kind of emotional compensation, which ultimately is not satisfying. Anyway, I'll leave it there.
I think that's a fantastic place to end what's been a great conversation. Not a happy place to end it, but an appropriately spiriting one. Because one of the important differences between any language of fascism now and the early 20th century is that politics now comes out of neoliberalism, comes out of the end of history, comes out of the despair at the impossibility of revolutionary political transformation, whereas politics in the 1930s in Europe came at moments of all kinds of radical and bold political projects. And you've both brought out that degree to which the radical right today attempts to give people languages of hope attentive to the utter alienation and desolation of previous projects of hope. Lots of very interesting questions we had in the chat that we didn't have time to get to, like someone asking, what about the religious right? That theme of the Bush years, when everyone talked about the Bible Belt of evangelicals, utterly replaced in the Trump years by the image of the Rust Belt worker, who doubtless will now fade, and a different image will arise in 10 years' time as the key demographic who matters. But of course, the image of the Bible Belt was the image of a believer, not the image as in the current right of a kind of total cynic, someone who says, I'm voting for Trump, the corrupt billionaire, because I know he's a corrupt billionaire, but I don't really believe there's anything except that swamp. So the only person who might train it is at least the person who offends all of the other swamp dwellers. And that kind of end of history pessimism, I think, indexes the challenge of the left, which is how we offer a kind of politics that believes
Barnaby
in the
had to come in at the end and ruin everything.
To the right, at least, has acknowledged the difficulty in our movement.
Had to make it all about himself,
transformation, and has come up with a nasty,
as people named Barnaby tend to do.
We've raised so many interesting and important things in this
there have been no
just
interesting and
that
important
about
things.
Alienation. Both Nikhil and Richard raised Wendy Brown talking about sociopathy. It's an important part of Richard's essay in the upcoming issue of Salvage, where he says, you might expect an old-fashioned fascism to react to COVID with all sorts of authoritarian lockdowns. People like Agamben and some Foucauldians had similar fears. But actually, the far-right reaction to COVID has been this kind of alienated individuality that says we don't want any forms of state repression. So there's obviously something distinctive there to engage with. Do look, everyone, at Richard's essay in Salvage number 10 when it comes out. It's currently being edited. It's got so many fantastic essays and works of art and poetry in there as well. And I just wanted to thank Richard and Nikhil and Annie and Haymarket Books and the team at Salvage and John, who's doing our technical work very valiantly. And just wanted to thank everyone for joining this conversation. Thank you so much.
All right, guys, I guess that's it for today. Now, we never really did get that definition of fascism, did we? Predictable socialist, never giving us the much needed definition of what you actually mean when you say the word fascist, not just people who disagree with you. Oh, well, maybe next time. Maybe next time we will. Well, guys, that is all we have for Socialism Saturday this week. Again, we do Socialism Saturday every week at 6 p.m., except potentially next week when I might be going to a real-life socialism conference. We're going to have to see if I can work that out. I make no guarantees, but I will try my best. But, guys, if you would like to come and join me for movie night tomorrow, and as a reminder, we watch movie night on Sundays at 8 p.m. in my supporter Discord. We watch a new movie every single week. And this is my month of narcissism because my birthday is on Wednesday. Happy birthday to me. I got to pick out all the movies for movie night. And so we are watching The Legend of Billie Jean at 8 p.m. tomorrow in the supporter Discord. In order to get access to the supporter Discord, you can do one of four things. Number 1, you can become a member on this here YouTube channel. Number 2, you can become a paid subscriber in my Substack, Carlyn, KARLYN.substack.com. Number 3, you can become a paid subscriber in my locals community, kb.locals.com. Number 4, you can become a subscriber in my Patreon community, patreon.com/unwoke. All of the links to all of those things are in the description below. Tomorrow, I will be sending out a newsletter called the Unwoke Roundup. And that will come out from my Substack, but then I will also be making posts on the YouTube channel page for community members, in my locals, and in my Patreon to give you access to the supporter Discord. If you are a subscriber on my Substack, a paid subscriber, please scroll down to the bottom of the Unwoke Roundup newsletter, and that is where you will have your links and things for the weekly perks, to include the 2 Zoom calls every single week, etc., etc., etc. For everyone else, I will be posting those perks on the specific platforms. So come and join us for movie night in the supporter Discord. It really is. It's so much fun, guys. It's like, it is. I don't mean to brag, but I truly believe that I have like the best community on the internet. I really do. They're so fun. They're so down to earth. They're weird. They're wacky. We're basically like the bad news bears of the internet. I love it. And I will see you guys tomorrow for movie night in the supporter Discord. If you've never joined us before, I hope you do. And of course, please make sure you're subscribing to my Substack, carlyn.substack.com. You can get a free subscription, or it is the best place right now to support the work I'm doing. $5 a month, $50 a year. I would love to get like 20 new subscribers in the next week or so to help get me on track with my goals. I've actually done pretty good in the last week since I made most of my posts paid members only. So that's pretty great. It did exactly what I wanted it to do. So guys, if you are waiting, now is the very best time to get signed up. I got lots of stuff on there to help you fight back against the woke insanity in your life. That's all I've got for right now. I don't think I'll be streaming tomorrow, but you know, maybe. We'll have to see how it goes. And that's it, guys. Take care. Have a great rest of your night, and we'll see you soon.